Very good afternoon from a slightly rainy Downing Street. Welcome to viewers on BBC One. We're reporting on the arrival of a new Prime Minister at number 10 to succeed Boris Johnson, who left office this morning. Liz Truss, Britain's third female Prime Minister after Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May. She is Britain's fourth Conservative Prime Minister in the relatively short space of 6 years. Now, Liz Truss saw Her Majesty the Queen at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire earlier today. This was the official photograph, and she accepted the invitation from Her Majesty to form a government. She takes office, of course, at a hugely challenging time with a looming recession and soaring energy bills threatening millions of households and businesses. So under pressure very much to announce an immediate plan to tackle the cost of living crisis. Now, the new Prime Minister is on her way. She's left Balmoral a short while ago. She's on her way to Downing Street, and she'll be making her way here to address the nation, the nations of the United Kingdom, because, of course, so far, the messages have all been to the Conservative Party membership. Very different today. And in Downing Street here, where the world's media is assembled, ready to enter, to meet the senior civil servants, to start work straight away on forming a new government. And she's likely to refer to the economic climate, the cost of living crisis, when she comes here in a short while to speak at the podium. The BBC understands, by the way, that household bills could be frozen at their current level for about 18 months, covering this winter and next. Earlier today, her predecessor, Boris Johnson, rather lucky, there was no rain at that point, left Downing Street for the last time as Prime Minister before formally handing his resignation to the Queen. And in his farewell remarks, he urged the Conservative Party to unite behind his successor.
Let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it, and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
The former Prime Minister, I'm getting used to saying that, the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, speaking here in Downing Street this morning before he left, travelled to Balmoral Castle, where he tendered his resignation to the Queen earlier today. And of course, we're now here in Downing Street expecting the arrival of Liz Truss, the new Conservative Prime Minister, who has accepted the invitation from the Queen to form a new government and is, as we speak, on her way back, flying back from Scotland, from Aberdeen down to London, and then will be brought in that swift cavalcade from one of the airports around London to Downing Street itself. That journey, I think, will take rather less time than it would if we were driving in London traffic at this time of day. So it'll happen, I think, within the next hour or so. Certainly that's our expectation. And then we'll see what the new Prime Minister has to say. So not addressing the mass of Conservative members anymore, but this really is addressing all corners of the United Kingdom and trying to give a signal about what she intends to do. She's promised quick action on fuel prices and the cost of living. Will she say a little more about that in the initial address? And indeed, how quickly can we expect some of the big cabinet posts to be filled? All of these questions, ones we can consider before Liz Truss turns up. And keeping company with me is the chief political correspondent of the BBC, Nick Eardley. Nick, let's start with logistics. Am I safe in telling viewers who are watching us this afternoon that we can expect the new Prime Minister roughly within an hour?
I think broadly so. It's a slightly different process to normal because instead of the mile or so up to Buckingham Palace and back, it's 500 miles each way up to Aberdeenshire today. So Liz Truss is on the plane just now. She's got a bit more time than she would normally have to mull over the address that she's going to give here. It's her big moment because for the last few weeks, as you say, we've heard Liz Truss talk to the Conservative Party. We heard that again yesterday when she won the leadership, when she became the Prime Minister in waiting. This is the moment that she talks to the country and she says, here's what I want to do with power. Here's my vision for what I'll do when I get behind that famous black door. And there is a lot in the entry, from the economic storm we're seeing at the moment to inflation, to the potential for more industrial unrest, more strikes over the next few months, problems in the NHS. But the one that's going to dominate the next few days, the one that Team Truss have been working on a plan to unveil almost immediately, is on the cost of living, on those energy bills that we've been talking about so much over the last few weeks. That's the thing that Ms Truss is going to be judged on in the next few weeks. And she has a plan that we're going to see that will involve her spending a lot of money to help people with their bills.
We'll talk a bit more about that in a second, because clearly there are lots of people watching who want to know more about that more than anything else, understandably. Part of that plan, of course, is putting the right people in place. So can we expect to have confirmed who the Chancellor is, who the Home Secretary is, before the close of play today?
Well, there's a cabinet meeting tomorrow morning, right. So I reckon we'll know most of who's going to be sitting around that table tonight. The man who's going to live next door in number 11 is Kwasi Kwarteng. He's currently the Business Secretary, a long-standing ally of Liz Truss. He's our neighbour at the moment, by the way. They live on the same street in London. They're going to be neighbours here in Downing Street by the end of the day as well. The word from sources close to him is that he is completely at one with Ms Truss. He sees himself as second to her. First Lord to the Treasury, it says on the number 10 door. He sees himself as the second Lord of the Treasury, looking after her interests. So the idea there is for a very close relationship, although we have heard that before, haven't we? And it's not always, doesn't always pan out that way. The Foreign Secretary, the man who'll be in the Foreign Office just behind us there, is James Cleverly, currently the Education Secretary. He was a junior minister under Ms Truss in the Foreign Office, so fairly certain he's going to get that job, and it's very likely that the Home Secretary is going to be Suella Braverman, someone else who stood at the start of this leadership contest but got behind Ms Truss when she was eliminated. So we're starting to see what our team might look like. One of the interesting political elements of that is, at the moment, a lot of the names that I'm hearing touted for the important jobs are committed allies of Liz Truss. And there are some Tory MPs who are hoping that she will also bring some others into the tent, some backers of Rishi Sunak, some from the centre of the party who aren't necessarily her natural bedfellows, to make sure that there's a broad tent in there. At the moment, I'm not quite sure who those enthusiastic Sunak allies would be. But let's see where we're at by this evening.
Indeed. Nick, let's pause there for a second, because we've kind of alluded to the in-tray. Let's talk a little more about what the issues are. It's worth reminding ourselves of the challenges that the new Prime Minister faces, just to go through them more methodically. As we've been hearing, top of the pile, without question, rising energy bills. Households across Britain facing huge hikes in prices. The price cap set to hit more than £3,500 in October, predicted to rise above 5,300 in January. You can see why people understandably are alarmed and frankly scared when they look at that prospect. They'll also need to tackle inflation, currently at 10%, showing no signs of slowing down. Of course, they'll have to grapple with the Bank of England expecting the economy to officially enter a recession in October. And then, of course, we're looking at industrial action, strikes over paying conditions continuing in many industries, key industries such as the railways. They're going on in the weeks to come. The health service, perennially a challenge, but more than ever, will clearly command the Prime Minister's attention. A big backlog of operations and treatments due to the COVID challenges. And then the winter's coming, and that always adds pressure in the NHS. And then we have the added challenge of social care, which, of course, has been something that lots of ministers at Westminster have tried to tackle over the years. And how will the new PM tackle the war in Ukraine? There will be continued support for Kyiv and a close relationship with Vladimir Zelensky. That will continue, but it'll be interesting to see how that might be adjusted. There's the migrant situation in the English Channel. More than 25,000 migrants have made that crossing this year in small vessels. That's still a source of controversy and no solution in sight there. Big questions as well for the future of the UK itself. The Scottish Government wants to hold an independence referendum next year, with the case due to be heard in the Supreme Court in October. The Scottish First Minister has asked the Supreme Court to judge whether it would be legally valid to go ahead with that referendum. We're waiting for that case to be heard. And of course in Northern Ireland, still no executive in charge there. It's stalemate, all tied up as well to the post-Brexit situation. The so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, which deals with trading issues in Northern Ireland. So they're looking at how to try to fix those issues, but it's really not clear at all how that will pan out. So the situation there, as I mentioned, is multi-layered, and with the protocol itself, well, there's no real consensus on the way ahead so far. The European Union, very clear. They're saying, look, you know, the UK signed this protocol in good faith, and they knew exactly, say the EU, what it meant and what it would lead to and what it involved. So that's it. Doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite there to go back to the negotiating table. We shall see. I mentioned the war in Ukraine. Obviously, that's the big foreign policy challenge of the moment. So with that in mind, and given the prominent role that Boris Johnson has played, I want to talk to Alexander Rodniansky, who is the economic advisor to President Zelensky, joins us now. Alexander, thank you very much for joining us. How does the change of Prime Minister affect the relationship between the UK and the Ukraine, or does it not affect anything?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, I hope it doesn't affect too much, because at the end of the day, the UK is going to support us, we believe, and we feel, no matter who's in charge of the government, no matter who's Prime Minister, no matter which government it is, centre-right or centre-left. So hopefully there won't be too much of a change, because that's what we see throughout all of British society. There's widespread support for Ukraine. But of course, there was some very good personal chemistry between the two leaders, Boris Johnson and President Zelensky, so there's no secret about that. So the question is, how much does that matter in the end? And probably not too much.
Well, of course, Liz Truss has been Foreign Secretary, so she's certainly not unknown on the international stage. What's been your perception so far of the way that she does business?
Well, it was very positive. Of course, we're delighted that she's now the Prime Minister. We have a very good working relationship with her. She enjoys a lot of support here in Ukraine too. People know her. So I think, we're very optimistic when it comes to the UK-Ukraine relations in general.
When we look at the broader international coalition that's been backing Ukraine, how would you describe the role of the UK in that kind of coalition of support? And do you sense that there's any pressure to adjust that, given the fact that the UK now has a new Prime Minister?
Yeah, so I think the role of the UK was pivotal throughout. The UK is definitely one of our main allies from the very beginning. Even before the war had started, the UK was already essentially one of our main allies, along with the Baltics, Poland, and the US, of course. And so I think that's going to remain, no matter, that's going to be the same no matter who's Prime Minister, as I said. We look forward to working with Liz Truss, and she said that Ukraine is going to be a key issue for her as well, no less than for Boris Johnson, and we have no reason to not believe that.
Alexander, very good to talk to you, and thanks very much for your time today. Very good to talk to the economic advisor to President Zelensky, and thanks for his time. We're also joined by Tobias Ellwood, who's served for a long time as a Conservative MP, recently had the whip removed by Boris Johnson, because I think it's fair to say, Tobias, thanks for joining us, you weren't Mr Johnson's biggest fan by the end of his premiership.
Well, thank you for reminding me of that. We now have a new Prime Minister, and it's important that we do support her, not least on the subject of Ukraine. You had your list of challenges that Britain faces. Many of them do point to Ukraine. The oil and gas prices, the food prices, because of the grain can't get out of Odessa in the scale that we need to, we do need to lean further into Ukraine internationally. There's an absence of leadership from France, from Germany, from the United States, and indeed from Britain recently. We need to make sure that there is a collective effort to stand up to Putin. Otherwise, I'm afraid this fire in Ukraine has the potential to spread elsewhere.
Some people listening might be slightly surprised to hear you say there's been an absence of leadership from the UK, given that Boris Johnson was there, I think, for the third time a few days ago. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's worth putting that into perspective, because I think Britain can be very proud of what we've done operationally to support Ukraine. Salisbury Plain, we've now training civilians, Ukraine civilians, to become soldiers. We've gifted weapon systems on a scale that other nations across Europe have yet to catch up with. But ultimately, strategically, how does this all fit together? How do we actually stand up to what Putin is trying to do and advance his influence in Eastern Europe? We don't have any answers to that yet. We've been too hesitant. We're risk averse, and that's being exploited by Putin as he develops an ever stronger relationship with China. We're entering a decade of change here, and these are the big challenges that we need to now address.
When you look at the range of problems, you've alluded to some of them already, that Liz Truss is now going to try to confront today. From what you know so far of the choice of Chancellor, if it is Kwasi Kwarteng and Home Secretary Suella Braverman, do you think that's the kind of team that will give confidence to people up and down the UK that this government will mean business?
You raise an important question, because it's not just about having perhaps the short-term solutions to get us through winter, a longer-term strategy to make sure that we can, weather this economic storm. You also need the buy-in of the British people. They need to have confidence that there is the leadership, the command, the authority, the team there that they can actually believe in. There was a desire during this contest to sort of reach in for your inner Maggie. That seemed to be a requirement by all the leaders. But I recall, as I'm sure you will, the big beasts that you had there. Michael Heseltine and Ken Clarke on one side, Nigel Lawson and Norman Tebbit on the other. That was the strength, the talent from right across the party. It was this broad coalition, this one nation approach, which then the nation was able to buy into. That's where I'd like our country to now go. That's the leadership I'd like to see, with everybody being able to support the Prime Minister.
Are you confident that that's what you will see?
Well, let's see what happens over the next 24, 48 hours. I'm not expecting a phone call myself, I have to say.
You shouldn't talk yourself down, Tobias. Thank you very much indeed. It's good to talk to you. Tobias Ellwood there, who reminded us, of course, that he had his differences with Boris Johnson, who removed the Conservative whip, but a former minister, of course, and former Conservative MP, and now saying that the party needs to unite behind Liz Truss. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, still with me. Nick, as I understand it, the Prime Minister will be flying back to one of the military bases just outside London, which is not unusual. Probably Northolt, but we'll have a look later. And then we'll come over here. So I'm thinking that as soon as we see the Prime Minister's plane landing, maybe less than half an hour after that, we should see the Prime Minister here.
Yeah, I don't think it will take her that long to get back with that escort she gets as Prime Minister. And, while she's on that short drive from the airport, what will be going through her head is that message to the country, that big moment that she's been preparing for since she found out the result of the Conservative leadership race yesterday. What we'll also see at that point, I think, is a lot of her supporters in the streets. Traditional for maybe some family members, political aides, political allies, some people maybe that might be in her next cabinet rolling up. We've already seen Therese Coffey go in. She's currently the Work and Pensions Secretary. I think she's likely to get a pretty big job in Liz Truss's new government. There's talk of her even potentially being Deputy Prime Minister. Haven't had that one confirmed yet, but a staunch ally of Ms Truss, and I think we can expect her to get a decent job and maybe to be out here in the street later listening to her political friend making her first speech as Prime Minister.
Well, there we are. Just another sense view of the media gathered outside number 10, with number 11 Downing Street just over to the left there, the home of the Chancellor, and then the expanse of number 10 Downing Street over towards the right-hand side. Very familiar sight, of course, on days like this. because the interest is not just here in the UK, but it's worldwide. So we have colleagues here from all around the world waiting to see the new Prime Minister arrive. And the images, of course, that we will have this afternoon are the ones that we will see not just on television and online, but of course they'll be plastered all over tomorrow's newspapers again on a global basis. So not just the words that the Prime Minister will have, but the image, all important. And some of our media colleagues, some of the familiar faces here from our fellow broadcasting organisations, including Dermot there, from Sky, and of course lots of our other colleagues from other companies as well. So we're all waiting rather patiently for the Prime Minister to arrive. And the message there from Tobias Ellwood was interesting, Nick, wasn't it? Because he was saying he wants to see a rebuilding of the so-called one nation Conservative approach. He mentioned people like Michael Heseltine. He mentioned people like Ken Clarke. I mean, all right, he is referring to 30 years ago. But that's what he thinks is the winning formula for the Conservative Party. Am I unfair in saying that they're a million miles away from that by now?
Well, look, I think the consensus in the Conservative Party changed under Boris Johnson. It moved a bit to the right ideologically. It became a bit more populist when it came to government spending. I think what we're going to see from Liz Truss is probably a fairly loyal cabinet, not necessarily the broad tent that Tobias Ellwood and others want to see, that brings in some of the One Nation MPs, the centrists. There are a lot of Tory MPs saying that she needs to bring as many people from different wings of the party in as possible to give herself a better chance of understanding what's going on in Parliament. I don't get the sense that those top jobs are likely to go to many people who are on other sides of the political debate in the Conservative Party. And there are some Tory MPs who think that Liz Truss's government is going to be pretty right-wing, that she wants to bring down taxes, she wants to do things that maybe some in the Conservative centre would shy away from doing at the moment. But the big thing she's going to do, ironically, the big thing that's going to dominate her week is a massive spending spree.
Yes.
She's going to borrow a lot of money to tell everyone across the country that those worries that we all have over bills, businesses and households, that the government is going to step in and help with them. The details of that are still being thrashed out, as I understand it. They've been evolving over the course of the day. But you can expect the government in the next few days to commit to spending tens of billions of pounds. Not something that Liz Truss was talking about during the leadership campaigns. Only a few weeks ago, she said she didn't want handouts, she wanted tax cuts instead.
Well, I think that's a crucial factor, isn't it? And when we think about in 2 years' time, we think about general election campaign, and traditionally the Conservatives have been very keen to blow their trumpet in terms of fiscal responsibility and all the rest of it. Yes, of course they can explain that they have to do this because people need help, and that may well be something that people are happy to accept, but there'll be lots of Conservatives on a certain wing of the party who, let's face it, will not be comfortable with that level of borrowing and spending.
You're absolutely right. I've been chatting to some of them this morning who are privately actually quite nervous about what this level of borrowing that we're talking about, a colossal sum that's going to be borrowed by this government to try and get through the next few months in the energy crisis. There are a lot of Tory MPs who are worried about that, but I don't think you're going to hear that many of them say it in public, for the simple reason that they know something has to be done. They know a big intervention is needed. And the calculation that Liz Truss and her allies and her new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, are making is that if they don't come up with something big, something medium term that's going to last at least a few months, probably a year and a half, then this crisis is just going to dominate all their time. So they're hoping that by coming up with something big now, they can talk about other things as well.
Just bear with us, Nick, because I'm just going to bring in our economics editor, Faisal Islam. Faisal, if I rudely cut you off, it's because the Prime Minister's plane is about to land and we'll have a look at that. But in the meantime, what are your thoughts on the extent of the borrowing and the commitment in terms of expenditure that this government is, we think now, likely to embrace?
Well, it's very much a sort of moving feast, the energy rescue plan that you've just been talking about with Nick there. We know the sort of broad parameters, the skeleton of it, if you like, that there'll be some sort of fix at a lower level than the £3,500 that Ofgem announced only a couple of weeks ago. Reports around that will be £2,500, and nobody's steering me away from that. So that would be considerably less than where the bills were sort of being planned to head, or where we thought that they were going to go. But actually, technically, it's an increase from where we are right now. So the reason for that...
OK, Faisal, let me just cut across for a second. I'm very sorry to cut across, but as I said, we were expecting to catch sight of the Prime Minister's plane, which is now coming into land in RAF Northolt, which is to the west of London. And it's an airfield that is used quite frequently by senior ministers and members of the royal family when they travel into the London area. So this is the jet that's bringing the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, in. Will be reflecting, no doubt, on lots of the themes there that Nick and Faisal indeed were talking about. What is she going to say when she arrives in Downing Street about this huge crisis that has now engulfed the UK, which is to do with fuel prices, it's to do with energy prices, it's to do with the cost of living crisis, and the fact that there are millions of households and businesses across the UK that simply can't see their way through this winter without a massive programme of government help. And that's really the nub of what we're talking about today. Yes, of course, we have all the ceremony around a new Prime Minister. We have the Queen inviting Liz Truss to form a new government, and that's all been done. So the ceremony is as we know it, but the plane is now touching down in RAF Northolt, carrying the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who will be making her way swiftly, we think, from there through West London and into central London, and heading towards Westminster and Whitehall, ready to arrive in Downing Street with, I imagine, Nick, as we look at these images, a statement that is already prepared and ready to go.
And it's one she'll have been thinking about for the last few days, because, I mean, let's face it, although we needed the official result yesterday, Liz Truss has been the favourite to become Prime Minister for a number of weeks now. So this will be a carefully crafted message about what her vision for government is. I think she'll want to talk about her economic plans. She's spoken a lot about growth in the last few weeks. That's going to be her byword for an economic strategy. I think she'll want to talk about lowering the tax burden as she sees it. I'm certain there will be other things, other policy areas she wants to talk about. But the one to watch out for is how much of a hint she gives us about how far she's prepared to go. And the thing Faisal was just talking about there, borrowing cash to help us all with our bills.
There's the site. Heavy traffic, of course, at the west part of London. This is the road that goes out towards the M40 and to Oxfordshire. That's for you to get your geography around this airfield. So Northolt is there. It's a very fast road, unless, of course, it's clogged with traffic, into London. But as Nick was saying, the Prime Minister's path will be smoothed, and they'll make their way in. And as we look at the plane there, which is now just taxiing over to the main building there in the airfield, I'll bring Faisal Islam back in as we look at these images. Faisal, you were saying there what the Prime Minister would need to be focusing on, and I interrupted you, but you were talking there about the extent of the project that is underway.
So what we do know is that we're hearing words from her team like extraordinary measures in extraordinary times, and that there will be a considerable increase in borrowing to fund this major intervention. You were talking there about the message that the new Prime Minister will want to give to the nation. Clearly, as you've been saying, she's been talking to Conservative membership mainly, and perhaps there's been a lack of reassurance for the nation as they see these scary bills announced by Ofgem, the charts showing them going even higher, the charts showing inflation going up to 15, 16, 17%. And so she will be cognizant of that, I think, in the message you get outside Downing Street, that many millions of households, not even just the households that are normally considered as amongst the sort of poor, it goes right up into middle incomes, people are suffering. They will want to hear from a new Prime Minister that she's got their back. And I think we will get that. But then there's a judgment. There's a judgment about how far you go, how much borrowing is enough, how much of this pain to mitigate, and for whom. What we do know, as I was saying, is we think there will be a sort of generic, universal part to this, and that's quite a move from where we were a month ago when the now Prime Minister was adamant that there would be no quote-unquote handout. So we've seen a shift, and that's because the situation on the ground has become worse. So there's a judgment on borrowing, there's a judgment on just how much help to give, but there's also a judgment on prioritisation. If she limits the help, if not everybody gets the help that they want and expect, will questions be asked about whether she's saving back borrowing power, if you like, for tax cuts that she's outlined to Conservative membership, for the tax cuts to national insurance, for the cancellation of the tax rise for corporation tax. So she could face some difficult political questions straight off the bat, because determining the size of the energy package could limit the manoeuvre for the very priorities that won her the leadership and won her the right to march into number 10, as she will do in about half an hour. And one other thing, just to pick up, you mentioned at the top of this show about her official title. Yes, it's Prime Minister, but it's also First Lord of the Treasury. The Chancellor is only actually the second Lord of the Treasury. So she will call the shots on economic policy. That relationship, always key, often tense, can define governments, can break governments, but I understand that she is beefing up the team covering economics in number 10 Downing Street, and will seek, as a former second in charge at the Treasury, as a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, she knows how the Treasury works, and will be seeking control of the apparatus at this very delicate economic time from number 10, which is an interesting move. Others have tried it before, it hasn't quite worked, but I think that's an interesting piece of phrenology, as it were, as regards how Downing Street will be run.
Faisal, intriguing. Thank you very much. Faisal Islam, our economics editor, as we look at these images live from RAF Northolt in West London. This is the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who's just arrived, flown down from Aberdeen, having seen the Queen in Balmoral Castle, having accepted the invitation to form a new government. The aircraft landed just a few minutes ago. I think we'll be lucky, Nick, won't we, at this point, to catch a glimpse of Liz Truss, because they'll be emerging, I expect, from the other side, the terminal side of the aircraft. But the flight is safely landed, and who do we think the Prime Minister will have with her in the plane? Who do you think it would be? A small team of
she'll have some of
advisors,
yeah, she'll have some of her closest allies, the ones who've been helping her write that political speech, helping her talk about how she wants to shape the cabinet, how she wants to shape the number 10 operation. Because although we spend a lot of our time talking about ministers and who's in the cabinet, there's a lot to think about how you structure that office as well. And, you know, Liz Truss has talked a lot about wanting to do things differently, to challenge the way they've been done in the past. Mostly about the Treasury, but I think she'll have some ideas of her own about how she wants number 10 to operate.
So, well, I think we can take a guess that the Prime Minister has now left the plane. The party seems to have disembarked, and they're making their way towards the terminal building itself. So a relatively short journey from there to Downing Street. So I reckon, I'm guessing here, but I mean, it'll be less than half an hour, won't it, really? Yeah,
she's only 7 miles away.
Yeah, it's not that far, is it? I'm conditioned by battling with the traffic myself, so that's why. No, it'll be a fairly quick journey. There we are. There we have the party. The Prime Minister among them there. We can just about catch a glimpse as they walk into the terminal with just a small team of advisors, as Nick was saying, having already prepared the statement which they'll deliver in Downing Street, which the Prime Minister will deliver in Downing Street in a short while. And of course, that means that there'll be some important phone calls made, I'd have thought, as well, from the car as they make their way from there, because the business of governing has begun. This is the important thing as well, Nick, isn't it? Because Liz Truss, Prime Minister, from the moment that she accepts that invitation from the Queen, it's not when they walk into the door here, although that's when she'll meet lots of the senior civil servants and the officials, but the fact is that she is already in charge and she's already Prime Minister. So there are already things that will be referred to her.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Liz Truss is a senior cabinet minister, or she was a senior cabinet minister before today. She was Foreign Secretary. She's had some important briefings in the past, but these will be some of the most important in her life. This is where she will be told more about the nuclear codes, about some of the security briefings that the Prime Minister gets. She'll be sitting on that plane and in that car, finding things out that she didn't know before. It's that moment, I think, where it probably starts to really sink in, not just the excitement of the job, but also the huge responsibility that comes with it and the things she's going to have to grapple with over the next couple of years.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall. Yes, absolutely. Nick, thanks very much. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to just discuss some of the more international challenges in some more detail before the Prime Minister turns up. Because, of course, as I mentioned earlier, talking to President Zelensky's economic advisor, there's a change of guard here, there's a change of administration, but the policy we expect will not change very much, or at least that's the assumption. So to look at the issues internationally, we're now going to talk to two colleagues. We're going to talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Before we talk to Katya, we'll talk to our North America correspondent, John Sudworth, who joins us now from Washington. John, first of all, change here. How will that be seen in the White House? How do they read the change in who's in charge in Downing Street?
Well, no official reaction, Hugh, from the White House at the moment. It was a public holiday here yesterday in the US, and of course it would be normal protocol to wait until the appointment has become official. We expect we may hear something in the White House press briefing due in the next hour or so. The US administration will be aware that this Conservative leadership campaign has been focused on domestic issues for obvious reasons, but they'll also be aware that when there is the election of a new British Prime Minister, and there have been a few of those in recent years, there will be questions asked about the so-called special relationship. Liz Truss has spoken about it in the past as Foreign Secretary. She said that for her the relationship was important but not exclusive. And although Prime Ministers for generations have nuanced the importance of that relationship, well aware that it is no longer, of course, a relationship of equals. I think some observers will see in those comments a bit of a portent. The idea that under Liz Truss there may be areas of tension, of friction, of conflict even. And if you had to pick one, of course, it would be over Northern Ireland. The Biden administration in particular, very focused on that issue and very concerned about efforts to renegotiate the Northern Ireland Protocol and concerns about what that might mean for the Good Friday Agreement.
John, many thanks. I'm going to go from Washington to talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in Brussels. Katya, from the EU's point of view, given, of course, there have been enormous sensitivities and friction between the UK and the EU over recent years, how will they regard the change of administration here in the sense of a new Prime Minister, a new team of people? Liz Truss has said one or two things in this campaign which have irritated a few European leaders. So how do you think they'll respond?
I think possibly what you're referring to, Hugh, there is towards the end of Liz Truss's leadership campaign. She was asked whether Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is a friend or a foe to the UK. And she, don't forget, as Foreign Secretary and hopeful new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said the jury is out. Now, many eyebrows are raised here in Brussels and across Europe at those words. They weren't seen as prudent, but I mean, politicians are pragmatists. They know what it's like to be on the campaign trail. There have been warm words of welcome from President Macron and from Olaf Scholz of Germany as well. But the scratchy relationship that has existed between the EU and UK since Brexit is expected to continue under Liz Truss. From inside the Commission, the word that's being said to me is we see Brexit was politicised from the start. We do not expect that to change under Liz Truss. Like in America, in North America, in the United States, as we heard there from John, big concern over Northern Ireland and the Brexit agreement on Northern Ireland. And Liz Truss will be expected to answer to a legal complaint from the EU within her first days of her premiership as well. There's migration as well. Don't forget, Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary, said that she was not worried at all about being robust with the French to stop those dinghies crossing the channel. But as well as being robust, there will also need to be cooperation if you would like help from the French as well. Emmanuel Macron said, look, we can cooperate on energy as well. And she will need to pay attention to the energy market and to her European neighbours there. Just this Friday, Europe's energy ministers are getting together. They want to find common ways on keeping prices down on Europe. If they find common ways, that is going to affect prices in the United Kingdom as well. So the EU is not a subject that she can push away from her in tray, even though it is so loaded with things at home. A word on Northern Ireland. If relationships get worse soon, the EU is threatening the beginnings of a trade war, starting with targeted sanctions. That's something that Rishi Sunak warned loudly against, considering all the other pressures that the UK economy is currently under.
Katya, as ever, intriguing. Thank you very much. And just underlining the issues there that are just overflowing in the in-tray. Katya Adler, John Sudworth, two correspondents, one in Europe and one our Europe editor, one our North America correspondent. I suppose a day like today, with major change, wouldn't be complete without a contribution from our friend Professor Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. Sir John, always good to have you with us. What's your perspective on the change that we're seeing today? What should we be focusing on?
Well, the honest truth is that the principal challenge facing Liz Truss is going to be the cost of living crisis, and whether or not she can, in the eyes of voters, negotiate it successfully. The honest truth is, I think the Conservative Party, as well as her personally, have suffered from the fact that they haven't had anything to say for the last 3 weeks. Support for the Conservatives in the polls has been slipping in the second half of the leadership contest. Labour are now around 10 points ahead. Indeed, YouGov today have put out a poll, which I should say was done before the announcement yesterday, that had Labour as much as 15 points ahead. What's, however, also true is that it's not clear at the moment that the public are convinced that Liz Truss is necessarily best placed to solve the cost of living crisis. YouGov, for example, asked the public about how much they trusted her to deal with a whole range of issues. Now, frankly, the numbers weren't that good on any of them, but the one on which the public had least confidence about her abilities to write the right decisions was on the cost of living crisis. Now, of course, that polling was done when, frankly, there wasn't a decision. It will now be crucial to see, A, what decision is made, and B, whether or not the public begin to be convinced. But the truth is that probably all the government can really try to do now is to pay political catch-up, because, of course, in the last 3 weeks, all the opposition parties said, cancel the increase. The energy companies said, cancel the increase. The government is now effectively climbing on board a ship that was already at risk of sailing out of harbour before they were also passengers. But of course, what this does also mean, I think, is that there are question marks about the extent to which this government can necessarily pursue the direction in terms of economic management that they were hoping to engage in. 6 weeks ago, Liz Truss wanted to cut taxes, go for growth, and wasn't that too concerned about inflation. She's going to end up being in government, her first action being about inflation, and taking measures that, in a sense, don't remind you of Margaret Thatcher, but rather they remind you of Harold Wilson. We now seem to be looking at a government that's beginning to introduce a prices policy, and of course, so far as the public sector is concerned, it also has something of an incomes policy as well. That's very much redolent of the 1960s.
John, we expect the Prime Minister to be leaving Northolt very shortly, so if we see those images, we'll bring them up straight away. I was interested in what you said there about the relative positions of Labour and the Conservatives. Is that Labour lead, as you describe it, now in the polls, to do with a more positive perception of Keir Starmer and his leadership and his policy offer, or is it to do with a negative reaction to the Conservatives?
I think it's primarily the latter, including the fact that, so far as the public is concerned, neither Rishi Sunak nor Liz Truss particularly excited or enthused them much as they saw of them during the course of the last 6 weeks. If you look at Sir Keir Starmer's personal ratings, well, we're looking at, roughly as many people think he's okay as don't think he's okay. He's not clearly attracting to his party. That said, again, coming back to what I was saying earlier, one of the criticisms that many people have made of Sir Keir's leadership is that he's been too cautious, that he's been reluctant to take position on issues. He's been focused very much on criticising the government. While on the cost of living crisis, he has taken position. Arguably it was one the Liberal Democrats took first, but he also decided to take the position. So he in a sense has staked out what should be done on this. He is also, by the way, staking out position. Again, this is the curious politics we're in at the moment. I think it's probably going to be fair comment to say that this Conservative administration, this new Conservative administration that's interested in smaller government ideologically, is probably going to pursue a policy that's going to result in a larger fiscal deficit than would be the case if the Labour Party was currently in office. Now, Labour, yes, want to cancel the increase in energy, but they're not wanting to cancel the increase in corporation tax next year. And of course, they're saying we should be funding some of the cost of the energy price cap through a windfall tax. Now, Liz Truss has set her mind very firmly against the latter of these. You put these things together, and I think the Labour Party at the moment is running the less fiscally ambitious stance. And as Faisal will already have explained to you, the one potential cloud hanging over the horizon that this government has to worry about is what are the markets going to make of it if indeed we get both tax cuts and we also get a substantial increase in spending. One of the things that we do know is that no government has ever survived at the ballot box at the next election if they have presided over a run on sterling and over a major economic shock. It's going to be pretty difficult, even if things stand, for this government to persuade people with living standards being cut that they should be re-elected in 2024. They will make their task even more difficult if they should suffer a run on the pound.
Fascinating stuff, John. Thank you so much, and very timely to be talking there about the challenges facing Liz Truss as her cavalcade makes its way from RAF Northolt. Thank you, John, very much. Good to talk to you again. Professor John Curtis there, Sir John Curtis from Strathclyde University. Let's take a look again at the progress that the Prime Minister's making just after I give you a little clue about what's going on, because there you have it. We have the lectern is up in Downing Street, and I was just referring to the fact that the staff from number 11 brought the lectern out just in front of number 10, literally just a few moments ago. So that's your very visible sign that the Prime Minister is on the way and is not long to go before Liz Truss steps up to give that address on her first day in Downing Street as Prime Minister. Listening very carefully, of course, listening very carefully will be the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, will be the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, and of course the political leaders in Northern Ireland as the Prime Minister's cars make their way along the A40 there, which goes right into the heart of London, past White City and Shepherd's Bush, and then into the Paddington area, and then it's right into the centre of London, down to Westminster. And when you have a kind of, when you have a cavalcade like this, Nick, it's pretty easy going, isn't it? It's pretty smooth progress. So with that in mind, let's keep an eye on these cars, because we'll be well prepared for when the Prime Minister is approaching Westminster and Downing Street. But as we look at these images, I mentioned there at those people listening very carefully in the devolved nations of Scotland and in Wales and in Northern Ireland. So in a moment, as we look at these images, we'll bring in Chris Page at Stormont, Howell Griffith at the Senedd in Cardiff Bay. But first, we'll go to Northern Ireland, and we'll talk there to another of our colleagues. I'm going to join Lorna Gordon now at Holyrood, and then Chris Page first of all.
Yes, Hugh, here at Stormont, the Devolved government hasn't been around since February in effect, and it all goes to that Northern Ireland protocol that we were hearing about earlier from John in Washington and Katja in Brussels. The post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland, which means that in effect Northern Ireland has remained inside the EU single market for goods, and there are now checks on goods arriving here from England, Scotland and Wales. To unionist politicians, that's unacceptable, something that weakens Northern Ireland's place in the UK, an economic border within their own country. And the biggest unionist party, the Democratic Unionists, are blocking the formation creation of a power-sharing executive in Northern Ireland until it says those checks on goods are scrapped. So the DUP seem to be fairly happy that Liz Truss has won the Conservative leadership race and is now taking the reins at number 10. They have said she should be pushing on with the legislation she introduced as Foreign Secretary, which will give ministers in London the power to unilaterally override parts of the protocol and in theory pave the way for the DUP to return to power sharing. But as ever in Northern Ireland, it is a very tricky balancing act. Nationalist parties, including Sinn Féin, who are now the biggest party at Stormont, the Cross Community Alliance Party, now the third biggest party, they are strongly opposed to Liz Truss's approach. They say that legislation would break international law, damage the UK's relationship with Brussels and therefore cause further instability in Northern Ireland. So it is a particularly tricky issue in the Prime Minister's in-tray. Key to it will be Liz Truss's relationship with, in particular, her Irish counterpart, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who has congratulated her today and also said he looks forward to an open and constructive relationship. There's a real feeling in the government in Dublin that the relationship between London and Dublin needs to be reset, needs to be improved, because things have been on a downward trajectory since Brexit. And as the political crisis here continues, people will very much be looking to see, of course, if Liz Truss mentions Northern Ireland specifically, what she has to say about wider EU and UK relations. And meanwhile, today there's been a reminder that Northern Ireland plays without a government at a particularly significant time because of the rising cost of living. The biggest ever increase in gas prices here has been announced. Firmus Energy, one of the local companies, putting bills up by more than 50%. So to their average customer, that will mean more than £800 extra on their gas bill per year.
Chris, many thanks. Chris Page with a reminder again of the challenges that Liz Truss is going to be facing as soon as she arrives in Downing Street, making very quick progress now through West London, on the approaches to West London, approach to White City and Shepherd's Bush as they make their way across to the Paddington area and then down that way, I think. I mean, they've got some alternative routes, but anyway, the speed they're going, they won't be too long before they get to Downing Street. So that was Chris Page with just a reminder of the issues that are dominating in Northern Ireland. Lots of them, of course, are familiar. And Lorna Gordon in Glasgow, why don't you just outline for us again the perspective there, not least with the SNP government in terms of its expectations of a Liz Truss premiership?
Yeah, you know, the SNP Green Party administration here in Scotland, here in Edinburgh, will of course have the constitutional question, Scotland's future, as one of their priorities. Nicola Sturgeon has said she would like to hold a second independence referendum on October the 19th of next year. There's a big hearing in the Supreme Court next month where the arguments about whether the Parliament where I am now has the powers to legislate for a second independence referendum will be heard in front of the Supreme Court judges. Nicola Sturgeon mentioned that independence and referendum bill in her programme for government speech, which she's been giving here at Holyrood a little earlier. She touched on a couple of other bills, a few other bills that they'd like to introduce. There was one which will end the practice of children under 18 being placed in young offenders' institutions, a new criminal justice bill, pledging to abolish Scotland's controversial not proven verdict. But the main focus in the programme for government, and she did say, the First Minister did say this was a more focused programme for government than usual, was on the increasing bills, the cost of living, the costs that people and businesses are now facing. So the Scottish Government said they're going to introduce a rent freeze on all public and private rental buildings. They're going to extend the child payment scheme here in Scotland. That's it's a benefits-related scheme. It's available to families on low incomes. It'll be extended to all children under 16, and families will now receive £25 a week for every eligible child. She announced that the fares on the nationalised ScotRail railway network here in Scotland will be frozen for several several months. But she did point out, she said that there was a limit to what the Scottish Government could do because the budget is £1.7 billion less than it was when it was published last December, and that the public pay sector deals that have been settled so far have cost £700 million more than have been budgeted for. She says the powers on the scale required to deal with this crisis do not lie with this Parliament here in Edinburgh, they lie with Westminster. So, of course, she's pushing Liz Truss to do more to tackle the energy crisis. That's a reserved area, and to use those fiscal levers we keep hearing about. She wants them to be used, but of course, ultimately, she wants those powers to rest with the Parliament here in Edinburgh, which Liz Truss has said no to a second independence referendum. And in response to the speech here this afternoon, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, said this was the worst possible priority, a second independence referendum, at the worst possible time. So independence still a priority for Nicola Sturgeon, who leads that SNP Green administration here in Edinburgh, but also tackling this cost of living crisis, which she has described as a humanitarian crisis. They're using very strong language here now, the SNP, to frame this crisis going forward. They're trying to put pressure on Liz Truss, and of course arguing repeatedly that they believe the best way to deal with this crisis would be if Scotland were independent.
Lorna, many thanks for setting the themes out for us there. Lorna Gordon, our Scotland correspondent. And we're still reminded, of course, of the fact that the Scotland landscape, the political landscape in Scotland, is yet another big challenge for the incoming Prime Minister, Liz Truss, whose car is now making its way with the police escort along the Westway, towards the Westway as it's called, the main route leading out of London towards Oxford, and it's making its way pretty speedily. Lots of the traffic has been stopped. I'm trying to get my bearings here, Nick, because I'm trying to work out exactly where they are on this road, and I don't think they've approached the White City section yet. They're turning off to the right. They'll have a pretty intricate route worked out, of course, but at the rate they're moving, they won't be that long before they get towards central London itself. And as we can see, all the roads have been cleared, so they're making their way down, I guess, towards Shepherd's Bush. Actually, I think that's the way they're going. But as they're making their way down, we've already discussed the priorities in Northern Ireland, and we've discussed some of the challenges in Scotland. Mark Drakeford, of course, in Wales is leading the only Labour administration in the UK in national terms, and the First Minister there will have his own thoughts on this change of administration in Downing Street, this change of Prime Minister in Downing Street. So Howell Griffith is my colleague in Cardiff, and we'll stay on these images of the Prime Minister's cars making their way down towards central London. I'll bring Howell in over these images, just to give us a sense, Howell, of the perspective in Cardiff on what's going on here in London.
Well, Hugh, as you point out, Wales has been run by Labour for over 20 years now, and previous Prime Ministers have often pointed over Offa's-Dyke as an example of how Labour runs public services, particularly when it wants to suggest that waiting times are longer, that educational attainment is lower. Will Liz Truss choose a different tack? So far, what we heard during the hustings for the leadership contest suggested not. She went as far as describing Mark Drakeford as a low-energy Jeremy Corbyn. Certainly their worldview is very different. She doesn't believe in redistribution. That is key to how Mark Drakeford sees the future for Wales. But there is something they have in common. They're both unionists. Both say they believe in the future of a united kingdom. There is, however, a different view of what Liz Truss will do for Wales. Plaid Cymru yesterday welcomed her succession as Tory party leader, saying she would be Britain's last Prime Minister. They think potentially under Liz Truss, as under Boris Johnson, there could be continued interest and increasing interest in independence for Wales. Nothing like the sentiments we've seen in Scotland, but Plaid Cymru see that as the future. The future of the relationship may come down to who she appoints as Welsh Secretary.
We'll probably find out over the next 24 hours who takes that seat in the cabinet. Will it be Sir Robert Buckland, the man who came in 2 months ago, initially supported Rishi Sunak, but then flipped a few weeks ago to say he supported Liz Truss? The problem there may be that although he is Welsh and is well liked amongst Welsh Tories, he's not a Welsh MP, his constituency in England. What message would that send to people in Wales, that someone who represents a Welsh constituency isn't the Welsh Secretary? She may give us the answer on that. Maybe not on the steps of Downing Street, but probably within the next 24 hours.
Indeed, Howell. Another intriguing prospect. Thank you very much. Howell Griffith there, who giving us some of the perspective from the Wales point of view, and of course trying to relay as well what the thinking within Mark Drakeford's Labour administration in Cardiff will be towards this new Prime Minister. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, is with me. We're looking at the images. They're winding their way, I think, Nick, through the streets of Acton, which is in West London. So, again, making fairly decent progress. And from there, of course, they'll be heading towards, well, what's your guess? Hammersmith and that kind of way into town, I think.
Yeah,
past
I would
Earl's
think
Court,
so.
That kind of way. But anyway, the route will have been
away.
worked out. I have to say there are probably, if the roads were clear, there are probably quicker routes, but they'll have their own logic for this, won't they?
More time to chew over that speech that she's about to make.
Too right. And what we heard there from our colleagues in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales just added to the sense of the kind of complex layers that this Prime Minister is going to have to deal with, because it's not enough that, you know, there is a huge energy crisis and cost of living crisis which affects all of the UK, but then you have what would be for any Prime Minister, you know, really daunting challenges to do with the Constitution, Scotland's future, Wales's relationship with the rest of the Union in terms of, you know, is it getting its fair share? This is one of the big Labour themes. And of course, Northern Ireland with that protocol. So it really is difficult to, you know, overstate, isn't it? It's an inbox that is actually overflowing with solutions that, frankly, nobody's been able to find so far.
It's one of the most daunting intrigues you can imagine, actually, because, you know, when we stood here 3 years ago when Boris Johnson was about to take over, it was Brexit. He had that big challenge where he said he'd go to Brussels, negotiate a new deal, force it through Parliament. Ultimately, he did, but he had a bit of time to do it. Liz Truss faces a bunch of economic storms immediately. You know, she has not weeks or months to work out the solution to some of the problems. For some of them, she has a matter of hours. Within days, she's going to have to set out what she wants to do on energy. But this is not going to be an easy premiership. And I found it really interesting just chatting to some of her supporters. There's a few dozen MPs at the other side of Downing Street waiting to come up here to watch Liz Truss, but some of them down there speaking to some aides who are going to be about this building in the next few days, they get the sense that this is a really difficult time for the country. And, you know, Liz Truss is an optimist. She's always talked about thinking that, not talking the UK down as she sees it, wanting to make the most of the situation and get the UK back on its economic feet. But when she arrives here in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I think it's going to be abundantly clear to her, and I suspect this will come up in her speech, that this is a really difficult time and that there are challenging economic circumstances that are going to last for some months yet.
So, as we can see, if you're just joining us live on BBC One and BBC News, we're seeing the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom making her way, accompanied by police outriders, from the RAF base in West London through these parts of West London towards central London and Whitehall and Westminster. Liz Truss having accepted the invitation from the Queen to form a government and thus becoming the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's long reign, the third female Prime Minister in British political history after Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May, all of them, all three Conservatives, and of course Liz Truss taking over at a time of immense political and economic challenge, social challenge as well, because we're at a time of economic crisis, people's own personal finances under a lot of strain, and looking ahead to the winter months when the price of energy and fuel is skyrocketing. So a very, very difficult time for so many people, and that is why Liz Truss is expected to make it a priority when she arrives here in Downing Street, basically spell out exactly what she intends to do when she gets into power. When this cavalcade reaches Downing Street, it's now in Shepherd's Bush, so we weren't that wrong, were we? She's now in Shepherd's Bush, make her way maybe down to the embankment, maybe up to Notting Hill. We'll see which way they go, but it's really not too far. And I think, Nick, you're right, basically we're looking at 10 to 15 minutes, aren't we, before they're here. So maybe, I mean, certainly by 10 to 5 I'd have thought, but don't hold me to that, I'm not responsible for the traffic. But as they come in, essentially we are looking at a Prime Minister who's taking over at the most difficult and challenging time. So people want reassurance. They want to have trust in those people who are in charge of government. They want to be able to believe them when they make pledges and promises. They want to have faith in what's going on and in standards of government. This is hardly a radical thing to say. It's the way the democratic process is meant to work. And Liz Truss, of course, taking over, fully aware that people have had very differing views on the conduct of some parts of government in recent years. And let's not forget, of course, that her predecessor, Boris Johnson, was forced out of office, in effect, wasn't he, by MPs who simply weren't happy with his own conduct and with his own standards of governance. That's the blunt truth. There's no way to sugar that pill. And therefore, the circumstances have been turbulent. Liz Truss will be more aware of that than anyone else. So there is an element here of having to restore trust. And of course, the Conservative Party, as she well knows, is at the moment trailing behind Labour in most of the opinion polls. And Sir John Curtis was underlining that for us earlier on. And John Curtis, Nick, was just basically saying, you know, she's got a window of opportunity which won't be open all the time, which won't be open for even a prolonged time, to convince people that A, she's up to the job. You know, that's not meant in a rude way, but to convince people that she's up to the job, she's got the skills and qualities needed to be Prime Minister at a very difficult time, to take very difficult decisions and to take them in the interests of the country. Now, those are, you know, challenges that she will need to grapple with straight away.
Absolutely, and to a lot of people, she will be introducing herself to the country right now. You know, she's been Foreign Secretary for the best part of a year, but before that she had held fairly junior roles. She was well known around Westminster, but she wasn't a household name across the country. So this is her chance to say to people, this is who I am. And remember that when Prime Ministers arrive here, their speeches are normally quite short. They're normally 3 or 4 minutes if Boris Johnson or Theresa May or David Cameron are anything to go by. But they want to set out a key theme, a key message, something that they will be remembered for. For Theresa May, it was the just about managings. A lot of it for Boris Johnson was about Brexit. We can just see, just down from where we are just now, some people who are likely to get senior jobs in the new administration. Nadeem Zahawi, the current Chancellor, I don't think he'll be keeping that job, but he's likely to get another cabinet position. We've got Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, down there. I think he's got a good chance of keeping his job, actually, given the war in Ukraine. He seemed to have performed quite well. And the man down there, James Cleverly, is quite probably going to be the Foreign Secretary. I think we can see now a bunch of couple of 2 or 3 dozen Tory MPs.
They're on the way,
starting to walk up Downing Street, Liz Truss's supporters. Some of them will be hoping for a job, I suspect, over the next few hours.
There's a small army of them, Nick, making their way up to Downing Street and going over to one side, just behind the Treasury building there, and of course getting ready, and the Foreign Office building the other side of it, to get ready for the arrival. As you say, we can see the Chancellor, Nadeem Zahawi, there, but as you say, just Chancellor for a few more hours, yes? I
think that's right. Kwasi Kwarteng's likely to take over from him, but you've also got in the pink suit there, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the person who took over from Liz Truss at the Department for International Trade.
And there's James Cleverly there, who we expect to be
Foreign Secretary, is almost certainly the job he's going to get.
So he's just outside his office in a few hours, yes?
I think that's right. And just to the right of him is the current Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, I suspect he's probably not going to be in that job. Jacob Rees-Mogg there as well, the recognisable figure from the Brexit debates. I think he's in line for a promotion. He's been linked with the business secretary job. He's been in a lot of talks over the last 48 hours or so with energy companies about that plan that we're going to hear from Liz Truss to invest tens of billions in keeping people's energy bills down over the coming months to try and avert the cost of living crisis getting even worse for households and businesses. But that's a very healthy turnout, isn't it,
yes,
of MPs and supporters and potential cabinet ministers.
So they've made their way up. They've been waiting patiently at the bottom of Downing Street. The gates are very firmly closed still, and Jacob Rees-Mogg there among them, smiling away, looking rather calm and cheerful. They've now made their way over to the side, and they're going to be waiting there for the new Prime Minister Liz Truss to pull up in that cavalcade, which is now making its way through the Shepherd's Bush area. So again, we reckon about 10 minutes away on a fair run for a cavalcade with a police escort. I think this is on Shepherd's Bush Green. If we come back into Downing Street, we'll see outside number 11 Downing Street. If we take a look at the scene now, we have some of the officials who are making their own presence felt. So there we are. We see Therese Coffey there, Nick.
A very senior ally of Liz Truss, someone that I think also is in line for a promotion. She's currently the Working Pension Secretary. She's been linked with health. There's a lot of moving pieces, so we're not certain. There's talk that she could end up being Deputy Prime Minister, which is obviously a symbolic role, but a very important one.
Yeah. And then we have, of course, other important allies too, just stepped out from number 11. Traditionally,
Wendy Morton next to Therese Coffey there. She could well be the Chief Whip by the end of the day. Potentially the first female
That would be a remarkable appointment, wouldn't it? That would make history, yes. In an office that has been so heavily characterised by well, let's just say robust male figures. So that would be
a source of controversy recently with Chris Pincher, the Deputy Whip, having to resign.
So lots would see that appointment as a welcome change and a good signal of the way things are moving.
And I think it will be a sign of what Liz Truss wants to do with power if she does bring in the first female Chief Whip to try and avert some of those scandals we've seen in the last few months. Some other aides in there as well, some of the team that will be trying to set the agenda over the next few days, trying to explain that energy policy to us all, the one that's been evolving over the past 48 hours or so, but is likely to be the thing that Liz Truss does this week to persuade everyone she has a plan to deal with the cost of living crisis. We're expecting it to be a big state intervention, quite possibly tens of billions of pounds committed to helping people with their bills. Some of the ministers there that will be helping her sell it over the next few days as well.
So the podium is ready. The rain has been keeping off, but I have to say, we're feeling a few specks again, and there are now, if you add them all up, quite a few hundred people in Downing Street. James Cleverly there, the very familiar figure who's going to become, we think, Foreign Secretary. He's been a close ally of Liz Truss. So will emerge as one of the key figures of the new government, the government that is being formed by Liz Truss today.
And a lot of them will be waiting by their phones over the next few hours, because the normal choreography on these days is that over the next few hours we will find out who's going to be in the most important ministerial jobs, those cabinet roles, that the people that will sit around the cabinet table over the next few months that will help Liz Truss set her agenda to the country. Her first cabinet meeting expected tomorrow morning before PMQs. So there's a lot of people there who I suspect we will be hearing a lot more of in the next few weeks and months, and who'll be sitting by their phones tonight waiting to find out if they've got a job and just how senior it is.
There was a time, Nick, there's the familiar figure of our other colleagues, former BBC colleagues, Robert Peston there, chatting there on air. Of course, lots of our fellow broadcasters are here and monitoring these events. There was a time, Nick, when, you know, the podium out, a big crowd like this in Downing Street, outside number 11, lots of MPs gathered. This would be a fairly rare sight, you know. This would be a very big event which didn't take place very often. Well, it is a big event, except that it takes place more often, because as I made the point earlier, this is the fourth change of Conservative Prime Minister in just 6 years, or the fourth one that we'll see in 6 years. And, you know, that's a sign of the turbulence that we've been through, that the UK has been through.
If you'd stood here 3 years ago when Boris Johnson had just won that mandate, that majority in the general election, and said that, you know, 2.5 years later, he'd be walking out of Downing Street against his will, having been brought down by his party, I think a lot of people would have thought that you were mad. But that's the way that politics has played out recently. That I think there's a feeling in the Conservative Party that they've got a bit impatient, that they've maybe become a bit too prone to changing their leader as the brollies start to go up, as the rain starts to trickle. I wonder how many wet politicians we're going to see over the next few hours. I wonder if this might slightly delay Liz Truss until these specks of rain have passed. But,
yeah, you do wonder. I mean, again, you know, they seem to be speeding along there, and I don't think there'll be any kind of hold-ups along the way unless they're unforeseen. Everything seems to have been cleared very effectively. Every junction has been cleared. Every switch of lane has been cleared well in advance. So it's a very smooth journey that they're having, as you'd expect for the Prime Minister, and even more importantly, I'd have thought, for a new Prime Minister who's on her way to Downing Street to make her first address outside the famous Durham number 10 for the first time, weaving their way through now towards the areas of central London from the Shepherd's Bush area that they've passed through. And I'm trying to get my bearings again here in terms of where exactly they are. It looks sort of fairly familiar. It's certainly closer to the centre, far closer to the centre than they were just a few minutes ago. I reckon again that you may be right, Nick. She doesn't really want to be in a position where she's getting up to speak in the rain, does she?
No, and some of her allies are looking a bit uncomfortable as they stand on the doorstep of number 11 at the moment as the rain starts to pound down. It's an unpredictable game, politics, and so's the weather today.
Certainly is. Off and on, off and on. I mean, it'll be seen as a sign of very good luck and maybe a good portent if the rain holds off. You can imagine her friends saying that, and then others, of course, leaping in if it's pouring down with rain as some kind of biblical forecast.
Sometimes the political metaphors write themselves, don't they? The looming economic storm, the changing political weather. But, you know, whatever it is, Liz Truss is sitting in that Range Rover right now, her new prime ministerial car, mulling over the speech that will, you know, set out her plan to the country. This is her moment to say to the millions of people who'll be watching at home and watching over the next few hours on the news what she wants to do with power. Why she has spent, you know, the last few weeks fighting so hard to get to this position. We know she has an economic plan that's revolving around growth. We know that she wants to lower the tax burden as she sees it. But, you know, this is also a chance, as she gets into very central London now, to come here and say to voters, I understand the economic pain and the economic risk that many people are facing at the moment, and I have a plan to deal with it. Now, I'm not sure we're going to get the full details of her plan today. I think some of them, frankly, are still being ironed out a bit. The T's are still being crossed, the I's are still being dotted, but this is her chance to persuade voters that she knows what she's doing and that she understands some of the economic pain to come.
Well, I have to say, the heavens have opened over Downing Street, certainly outside number 10 and number 11. The lucky ones have got umbrellas, with us included, and we're now in a position where we're just wondering whether they'll delay the arrival for a little bit, because I have to say, for those people standing outside number 11 Downing Street, a few of them have got umbrellas, lots of them are getting very, very wet. The Prime Minister's cars, Therese Coffey there, having taken shelter very wisely. The cars, we think, are now through to the Kensington area, so it shouldn't be far away at all. The microphones have been protected because, again, the last thing you want is cables and microphones wrecked by the rain. And you can see there that for those who have not come out with a brolly, well, it's a bit of rain to be soaking into the suits and into the clothes, but the umbrellas have gone up everywhere. And for the Prime Minister who steps into Downing Street in a moment, I've got to say, if she's lucky, it'll hold off, because we've had long patches of no rain at all. I'm wondering as well, for the officials who are gathering inside, because we'd love to see behind the door, wouldn't we? There'll be people gathering inside, including a very important figure of the Permanent Secretary, the Cabinet Secretary, who is in charge of all the civil service. And that's the person who will greet the Prime Minister inside number 10. And that's where the first big conversation will take place in terms of responsibilities that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, the Cabinet Secretary, by the way, may well change over the next few days. There's a good chance that Simon Case, who's the current Cabinet Secretary, will be on his way out. So what happens is, this morning we saw a different group of people standing outside number 11. That was Boris Johnson's team. They go. The special advisors are out, but the civil servants, most of them stay, and they are the continuity that helps Liz Truss adapt to her new job over the next few hours, to get her feet under the desk, to help her team log into their computers, the simple things of having a new job that become really important. But over the next few hours and the next few days, I think Liz Truss will have her own ideas about how she wants to structure the operation in number 10, who she wants in those top jobs. She's always been a bit wary of the civil service. She's wary of some of the way things have been operating over the last few years. We heard her talk about it during the campaign. So it wouldn't surprise me terribly if some of those big names in the civil service do change over the next few hours.
Well, I'm sure the mics are picking it up, but the rain is now hammering down on the umbrellas. So those are the sound effects, if you're wondering what they are. And as you can see, some protective action being taken for the podium itself, because once rain gets into those mics, well, who knows what'll happen. That'll be fun. So we're expecting the Prime Minister to arrive here in Downing Street within, what you reckon, Nick, 5 minutes?
I'd be surprised if we see her before this weather calms down a bit. In fact, we're just seeing the lectern being taken away.
This is it. There you go.
I wonder if that's to protect it, or because they're having second thoughts about...
They'll do it inside, maybe.
This outdoor speech, yeah.
Because you couldn't do it in this, not in a million years.
No, we're lucky to have an umbrella that we're both huddled under at the moment, but I can't imagine you'd want the biggest speech of your life to be in this pouring rain.
No. It's a huge gamble, really, isn't it? Because even if it clears up a little bit, there's always the risk that it'll start again. So you know the inside, the layout very well, Nick. I'm assuming that there are 2 or 3 options inside where a statement could be made.
Well, there's the new room where we saw those COVID press conferences that would be an easy option to jump into if the new Prime Minister wanted to make an indoor statement. There won't be any questions. There won't be, I imagine, a press conference or anything like that. But there are certainly options within that building if this rain doesn't clear up over the next few minutes. I'm looking at some very uncomfortable looking senior allies of Liz Truss at the moment. A few extra umbrellas have been brought out. I wonder if the numbers of MPs down there might start to dwindle shortly. You can see Therese Coffey there. She's found herself a new umbrella. She's being sheltered by one of Liz Truss's senior aides there.
Well, I've got to say, Nick, I've been in this street many, many times over the years, more years than I care to recall, for lots of dramatic events, but I've not been here in a bit of a rainstorm, and it does present its own challenges, not just for the politicians involved, of course, which is understandable, but for the media too, because rain is the enemy of our cabling and communication. So if something happens, you'll know exactly what's to blame.
Yes. I seem to remember that when Boris Johnson took over, it was one of the warmest days of the year, and we all found ourselves with no jacket on. But here we are today in a very different climate, and I'm sure Liz Truss will be sitting in the car just now, slightly worried about some of the political metaphors being written. I should just say that her team, senior aides, have just popped back into number 11, perhaps sensibly to shelter from this rain. She could do a couple of laps of the block if she wanted to.
She
see if it
could,
holds
but
off, but it's not looking good, is it?
the way this is coming down, I think that actually it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. I have to say that one of my weather colleagues back at base did say yesterday that tomorrow afternoon could be a little bit tricky, she said. Well, how right was that?
Yes, and we can just see at the bottom of the picture there some of the MPs who are waiting to greet the new Prime Minister.
Lots of them are moving.
Are just popping back, I think, into number 9 there, where they can take some shelter.
Yeah.
Sometimes the headlines write themselves.
Yes, they do, and they're not good sometimes. I'm just thinking. Oh, well, look at them! Look at them! They're all sort of charging over there, down towards the Cabinet Office building. Yes. Where they can possibly take some. Yeah.
We're very unlikely to hear from Liz Truss imminently. I wonder if she may choose to do her speech a bit later instead, but can't see a Prime Minister standing out here in this weather.
No, and you couldn't blame them really. So there's the Prime Minister, who I'm sure right now is being involved in a conversation about what exactly they do when they get to Downing Street. The rain's slacked off a bit now, I have to say. It's a little bit better. Do I dare take the umbrella down? Yes, why not? There you go. So you can see the Prime Minister's car. They're going through. That looks to me as if it's not too far from. It's just near the Thames, isn't it? It's one of the bridges on Thames. So they're on the embankment, I think, going past. I think that's Chelsea. No, that's Albert Bridge. So they're going past Albert Bridge. So it's a very short distance from there, Nick, up to Vauxhall Bridge and then Lambeth Bridge, and then they're at Westminster.
Which is very close.
So they're very close, really, aren't they? It's.
But we don't have a podium anymore, so I suspect that we're not going to see Liz Truss say anything on her arrival. We are waiting for confirmation now.
What I'm told now is that the Prime Minister will arrive in Downing Street and go into the building. Okay, so there'll be. I'm told that there's very unlikely to be any words when she arrives.
The podium just going back into number 11.
And then there'll be some kind of confirmation later as to how that address is to be delivered. So maybe coming back out to deliver it later on, or maybe delivering it inside. But what we're now being told is that she will arrive, and she will arrive in just a few minutes' time, but that it's highly unlikely that she will say anything when she arrives. That will wait until a little later on. It is a risk, isn't it? It's just stopped again now. I mean, it's very unpredictable, I have to say, but it's probably too big a risk to take. So along the embankment here, and there you can see the kind of rather grey, muddy banks of the Thames just beyond the embankment there. Some of the engineering work that's taking place around the Thames, lots of it to do with this big new sewer that's been put, the giant kind of sewerage project that's been put through near the Thames at enormous cost to sort of update the Victorian system put in by Bazalgette more than 100 years ago, which has done amazing work, but now needs to be boosted a bit in terms of the capacity in the capital. And then this now is, for those of you just joining us on BBC One, we're watching the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, making her way along the embankment, along the River Thames, up towards Westminster, to the Houses of Parliament, and then along Whitehall up to Downing Street, where we were expecting her to make her initial address as Prime Minister, but because of very heavy rain, which has now stopped, by the way, but because of very heavy rain, we now think that it's unlikely she will say something when she arrives, but we'll say something a little later on when things have dried out a little. So passing under the railway bridge there, that's the railway bridge that leads up to Victoria Station, so just again to get our bearings. And then this road along the embankment going up towards Vauxhall Bridge, across the river from the headquarters of MI6, and then past the headquarters of MI5, and then up towards the old Lambeth Bridge. So passing quite a few of the old historic and famous bridges across the River Thames. Lots of greenery on the banks of the Thames, and the river looking rather grey and uninviting today, I have to say. Lots of rain has fallen into it in the last few hours. So back here at Downing Street, I can see that there are some MPs re-emerging. And the podium's coming out. Oh, Nick, let's keep our fingers crossed. We may be in luck after all.
There's hope after all.
Yes, there's hope after all that the Prime Minister will be able to make her initial address when she arrives. So there you go, at 2 minutes to 5. If you're watching on BBC News and BBC One, you're watching wherever you are in the world watching. We are in Downing Street. We are awaiting the arrival of Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who is within minutes of completing her journey from Scotland, where she's been to see the Queen, and she's now on her way to Downing Street, where there are lots of Conservative MPs and lots of advisers and officials waiting to greet the new Prime Minister, and lots of interest, of course, in what she will have to say. What tone will she strike? To what extent will she reach out beyond the Conservative Party, which has been her focus for the last few months, and have a message which people will find reassuring? That's the point. Labour's main point today, of course, has been that they think the Conservatives are out of ideas and that a change of Prime Minister is neither here nor there, that the party's been in power for 12 years and that, frankly, it's time for a change. That's the Labour point. And Sir Keir Starmer's been saying that very clearly. Well, Liz Truss's job when she gets here in a few minutes' time, of course, is to really lay out the case for her vision and the way that she intends to run government and the way that she intends to deal with this cost of living crisis and this huge crisis provoked by fuel prices. What is the strategy? What is the set of measures that she is preparing to unveil which will give people some hope and some reassurance given the widespread alarm that there is around? We're within a few minutes now of Liz Truss's arrival in Downing Street itself, finishing touches, making sure the microphones are nice and dry after a bit of a soaking, the podium in place outside the famous door of number 10, the official residence of the Prime Minister and the First Lord of the Treasury, to give the Prime Minister their full and formal title. And of course, there will be a crowd of people outside number 11 who've re-emerged now. Just a quick test on the microphone levels. And next door at number 11, a crowd of people who've re-emerged. Lots of them a bit damp, but at least now we're in the happy position of not being rained on anymore.
For now.
For now, exactly. So there you have the scene in Downing Street. And lots of those people there will be, as you said, Nick, earlier, some people who will be hoping for some good news in the hours to come.
They'll be sitting by their phones, waiting to see if they're in the cabinet. There's a good few faces in there who I'm fairly certain will be in top jobs in Liz Truss's government. And as she drives through rainless London now, she's about to deliver the most important political speech of her life. Because we've heard a lot from her in the last few weeks where she's been pitching to Conservative members. This is her moment to talk to the country, to stand back a bit and say, here's my big political vision, here's the thing that I want you to know about me, that I'm going to deliver as a politician. It'll be about the economy, I think it'll be about the cost of living, and it'll be about her policy priorities.
Well now, if we look at the progress, they're turning right. And that means they're going over Lambeth Bridge, which is going to the south side of the river. So it's not the most direct route. And they'll be crossing that bridge and then coming back on the other side. So it's a bit of a, if I'm looking at this correctly, it's a bit of a loop around. And then, can I just see Lambeth Palace there? Yes, indeed. So they're turning left and going along the south bank. And then they'll probably go over Westminster Bridge, I'd have thought, and come back past the House of Parliament. There you go, the red brick just in the background there, the ancient Palace of Lambeth, the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then past the high walls and the magnificent garden. There you are, have a look at it just in the background there. That is the Archbishop of Canterbury's garden at Lambeth Palace. It's one of the most magnificent in London, really is. It's a magnificent sight there. And then along past St Thomas's Hospital, which is the great massive buildings that we can see now, centre screen, just coming up to the centre of the screen there. All of these buildings which are dominating the screen are part of Guy's and St Thomas's. And as soon as the Prime Minister arrives in Downing Street, we are told now, Nick, it's confirmed that the rain panic is over and that the Prime Minister will indeed say something before she goes into number 10. So that's good. We'll get the message straight away. So the cars are making their way around to the big roundabout at the end of Westminster Bridge. So let's see if they turn left at this point. They should anyway. There you go. And past St Thomas's there, the big white building top of the screen, and along Westminster Bridge, where they'll have a magnificent view right ahead of them of the Houses of Parliament. The old County Hall building on the right, which was once the home of the Greater London Council. And then straight ahead over Westminster Bridge, and Liz Truss will see the Elizabeth Tower, home of Big Ben, the Great Bell, and of course the two Houses of Parliament. Her domain, at least the House of Commons, and anyway, and of course she'll have her own official suite of rooms there as Prime Minister from today. Boris Johnson having vacated those earlier. They're crossing the bridge and they'll either go straight across into Parliament Square or they will be going right along the embankment again. I'm just trying to... Yes, they are. So they're turning right, as you can see, past Portcullis House, which is that great big rectangular building full of MPs' offices with the Union flag flying. They're going down the embankment and they'll come up to where the Ministry of Defence building is. And at some point they'll be turning left, probably through the Ministry of Defence, which means they'll come straight across towards Downing Street. So we really are within a couple of minutes of them arriving. The gates are still closed in Downing Street at this stage, so it's not going to be within 10 seconds, we can put it that way. They're still going along. I think actually, Nick, looking at this route, they're going to go up to where the Horse Guards building is, and where the Horse Guards Hotel, as it used to be, is, and then past the building of the National Liberal Club, and basically they're going through the road that links up with Whitehall, right by the Ministry of Defence building. That means that they are now within seconds. They're on Whitehall, the gates have opened, and Liz Truss is preparing to arrive in Downing Street for the first time as Prime Minister. Past the Scotland office on the other side, past the Cabinet office, and then turning right into Downing Street, where the gates have been opened. The new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, arriving in Downing Street, where she will, in a few moments' time, address the people of the United Kingdom, a message that will be heard, of course, around the world, and set the tone for her premiership. The fourth Conservative Prime Minister in the space of 6 years. Applause from MPs and supporters who are on one side of Downing Street. There they are, on the right-hand side. And a big cheer for Liz Truss, who walks with purpose and a smile up towards the lectern to greet people for the first time as Prime Minister.
Good afternoon. I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government. Let me pay tribute to my predecessor. Boris Johnson delivered Brexit, the COVID vaccine, and stood up to Russian aggression. History will see him as a hugely consequential Prime Minister. I'm honoured to take on this responsibility at a vital time for our country. What makes the United Kingdom great is our fundamental belief in freedom, in enterprise and in fair play. Our people have shown grit, courage and determination time and time again. We now face severe global headwinds caused by Russia's appalling war in Ukraine and the aftermath of COVID. Now is the time to tackle the issues that are holding Britain back. We need to build roads, homes and broadband faster. We need more investment and great jobs in every town and city across our country. We need to reduce the burden on families and help people get on in life. I know that we have what it takes to tackle those challenges. Of course, it won't be easy, but we can do it. We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation with high-paying jobs, safe streets, and where everyone, everywhere, has the opportunities they deserve. I will take action this day and action every day to make it happen. United with our allies, we will stand up for freedom and democracy around the world, recognising that we can't have security at home without having security abroad. As Prime Minister, I will pursue 3 early priorities. Firstly, I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. I will drive reform in my mission to get the United Kingdom working, building and growing. We'll get spades in the ground to make sure people are not facing unaffordable energy bills, and we will also make sure that we are building hospitals, schools, roads and broadband. Secondly, I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply. Thirdly, I will make sure that people can get doctor's appointments and the NHS services they need. We will put our health service on a firm footing. By delivering on the economy, on energy and on the NHS, we will put our nation on the path to long-term success. We shouldn't be daunted by the challenges we face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done. We have huge reserves of talent, of energy and determination. I am confident that together we can ride out the storm. We can rebuild our economy and we can become the modern, brilliant Britain that I know we can be. This is our vital mission to ensure opportunity and prosperity for all people and future generations. I am determined to deliver. Thank you.
So there we have it, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Liz Truss, smiling broadly with her husband, happy to be there after a very long campaign, and making their way into Downing Street the first time as Prime Minister, and now to meet all the senior officials and civil servants who will be helping her to form her government. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent, with me. We were kneeling there watching that, just keeping a close eye, and more particularly, Nick, taking notes as those words were delivered. What did you make, first of all, of the way in which she handled herself?
Well, look, Liz Truss has admitted herself that she's often not the strongest speaker, but that was her moment to be assured and to assure the country that she had a plan for what was coming. And I thought it was designed to be honest, to say, look, things aren't going to be easy, but also to be optimistic, as Liz Truss has tried to be throughout the leadership race. You know, she used that exact phrase, it won't be easy, but we can do it. There was a reference to the weather, saying, as bad as the storm may be, the British people are stronger. Now, there wasn't detail. We've talked all day about what detail we would get on energy plans. There was none there. I think we're going to get it pretty soon, though, in the next couple of days, and we have a rough idea of what it's going to be already, with a lot of money thrown in to help subsidise bills over the next few months. But she set out the three things she wants to do immediately. They are to deal with the energy crisis, as she promised, to start growing the economy with those tax cuts that she talked about. And another thing that has come up in this leadership race, but not as prominently as it maybe does in, say, a general election, the NHS. She's promised to get that back on an even keel. Her ally, Therese Coffey, a potential health secretary, standing just by there. So we know now what Liz Truss wants to do with those first few months, those first few weeks in power.
Couldn't help noticing that she went out of her way again to mention tax cuts as part of a radical plan to get the economy moving again. There's been quite a lot of criticism of that. There was a cutaway image of Nadhim Zahawi, the outgoing Chancellor, while the remarks about tax cuts were being made. And I'm just wondering, to what extent is there a consensus within the Conservative Party around this rationale of cutting taxes at a time when we know they're going to be looking for extra resources? So the rationale around that is still being hotly debated.
It's controversial because the tax cut we're going to see, first from Liz Truss, is to reverse the rise in national insurance. And the people that benefits are high earners. The more money you earn, the more national insurance you pay, the more tax you're going to save under Liz Truss's plans. So there are a lot of Tories who think it's the wrong priority, that actually keep that money in the NHS and use it to build new hospitals and to give people a better chance of seeing their GPs. But Liz Truss went into the race to be Prime Minister knowing that that would be popular with Conservatives. They've chosen that path. So there will be some Tories who continue to think that it's the wrong strategy, but it's going to happen, and I think a lot of Conservatives will bite their tongues now. The ones who were complaining about it over the last few months will start to say, look, she's the leader, she's the Prime Minister, she gets the benefit of the doubt for now.
She was quite calm, wasn't she? She seemed calm and she seemed collected. She clearly sort of prepared in some detail the statement. She was very familiar with the content of it. So all of the preparation was clearly in place. Just picking that up because, as you say, there is an element of debate around how convincing a performer she can be sometimes. But that was, I suppose I'd call it businesslike and efficient. It wasn't going to set the world alight in the way that she delivered it, but it was done in a professional and efficient way. Am I being unkind, or would you describe it as that?
I think the calculation her team will have made today is that the country's facing a bunch of really serious crises. And actually too much optimism there, or too much of the boosterism that maybe we've seen from the last government, that actually Ms Truss does exhibit sometimes, wouldn't go down all that well. This was, we talked before the speech about needing to pivot from talking to the party to talking to the public, to the millions of voters who'll be making their minds up about Ms Truss over the next few weeks. And I think she wanted to appear businesslike and serious to them. And we will see, I think, a bit more of that over the next few days when she sets out that energy plan. What we have is the vision, the 4 minutes of here's what I want to do. But look, yesterday Liz Truss said, I'm going to deliver, deliver, deliver. The big question now is how. Who she's going to put in that team to make it happen, and how quickly she can do those things that she's promised us on.
Okay, Nick. Reaction coming in from different parts of the world to the appointment of Liz Truss as Prime Minister. I think we can see the latest social media contribution from President Biden, who's been on Twitter. Congratulations to Prime Minister Liz Truss, says President Biden. I look forward to deepening the special relationship between our countries and work in close cooperation on global challenges, including continued support for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression. So very much underlining what President Biden wants to see, which is to continue to cooperate on the Ukrainian situation and, of course, to support Ukraine in its current terrible predicament. So congratulations there from President Biden to Liz Truss. I'm going to bring in Thangam Debonair, the Labour MP, who will have been, I hope, listening to the new Prime Minister's statement, Shadow Leader of the House. Thangam, thanks very much for joining us. I'm hoping you heard the statement from the Prime Minister in the studio there. What did you make of it?
Well, was it really worth the wait? I mean, we'd had such a build-up with the motorcade going through the rain, and was it going to rain on her parade or not? And in the end, she got lucky with the rain, but really, did the country get lucky with what she said? I'm afraid I don't think so. I mean, she talked about Aspiration Britain. If only there'd been 12 years of Tory government for her to do something about that. She's been in government. The Tories have been in government for all that time, and she's now saying she'd like to build an Aspiration Britain. She also talked about this country being built on people who get things done. Absolutely right, but it does rather seem as though that doesn't include her or the previous 3 Tory Prime Ministers. So there's a lot to do. We heard that she's going to do something about the energy price crisis. Well, we need to know what, because millions of households up and down the country are worrying about that right now. Labour already has a plan. I hope that Liz Truss is reading our plan carefully, because Labour's plan puts working people at the heart of it, who are worrying right now about how they're going to get through the winter. They're worrying right now about whether or not the NHS will be able to help them if they or their family get sick. And they're also worrying about whether or not there will be any police service to help them if they are victims of a crime. Now, that wasn't mentioned. Her plan about the economy felt really thin, considering how long she's had to work on it. There's been weeks of Tory leadership hustings, during which time the woman has made many, many uncosted spending commitments in terms of tax cuts. Now, tax cuts, you've already mentioned the criticisms she's had from her own side. I just think we're making the wrong choices here. And if Liz Truss really wants to make the right choice, then she, a former Shell employee, needs to decide that instead of siding with the big oil and gas producers and letting them get away with their windfall tax, their windfall profits, she needs to take some money off them and help working people pay their bills this winter. That's the choice that Labour's making, and that's what we would do if we were in government.
You know that the shape of the debate over the last few days, you know full well it's been around looking at a package of measures for households and business, which could involve £100 billion worth of government commitment, really, in terms of that kind of spending, or allowing people to borrow through a certain mechanism which would amount to that kind of money. Would you support that kind of package? Do you think that that kind of package is the way to do it, or are you more in favour of trying to tackle the very big profits that some of these energy companies are making?
The thing is, we're a party of government. The Labour Party aspires to be in government. It would be wholly irresponsible for me or anyone else in the Shadow Cabinet to say that we can back this plan without knowing how she's going to pay for it. Now, anyone can wave figures around, but the Labour Party actually has a costed plan. We know where we'd get that money from those big oil and gas producers who've made such massive windfall profits, and we would tax them to make sure we could pay for, it's part of our fully funded package that we could pay for helping people out with their bills. But she's got so much else to do, and I'm sorry, just mentioning big figures like that doesn't cut it. It also doesn't deal with the problem in the medium and long term. So we've got a problem here with energy security, but we've also got the same problem with the climate crisis and with people who are paying these eye-watering bills, many cases in poor quality substandard accommodation, damp, cold and drafty, where they're paying to heat the sky. Now, Labour, we proposed a programme of home insulation a year ago. If they had just picked up that plan then, remember Liz Truss was in government then, the Prime Minister, today's Prime Minister, could have influenced yesterday's Prime Minister to insulate those homes so that some of the hardest up households would be warm this winter and would have lower bills. Now, that's what we need to do. If they won't do it now, they need to do it in the medium term. Labour's plan does include that, but she also ought to be telling us how she's going to invest in that renewable industry, the new nuclear, the industries that we need to power our future. There was no mention of that either. Now, of course, we're told we're going to get an announcement later this week. I do hope that it makes clear what choices the new Prime Minister is making, because Labour's made a choice, and it's to help working people and pensioners and people on low incomes and people actually, frankly, on middle incomes as well, who are worried sick about how they're going to get through the winter. We've made that choice. We know who we're backing, and I'll wait to see what Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, who she decides to back.
Thank you, Debonair. Good of you to join us. Thanks very much for sharing your views with us. We'll see, of course, what happens when we get more detail on the energy plans. And, of course, there'll be an exchange tomorrow at Prime Minister's Questions, the first opportunity for Liz Truss to be answering questions at Prime Minister's Questions against Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. So that'll be an interesting exchange, to put it mildly, Nick, won't it? And we'll see then what the kind of chemistry and exchange will be like between these two. It'll be very different, I imagine, to the Starmer-Johnson years.
I think it will, and there's an interesting sort of assessment for Keir Starmer to make about how he approaches this, because what that speech showed us was that Liz Truss is going to operate very differently to Boris Johnson. There were no references to Greek mythology or to Roman dictators from Liz Truss. As you say, it was a business-like, straight down the barrel, here's what I want to do with power speech. So, you know, it will be interesting to see how that political debate plays out over the next few days. It will focus, I have no doubt, on the cost of living crisis. You know, Labour wants that full plan from the government about how it's going to try and cap energy bills for us all. And as I say, the detail of that from Liz Truss will be another big moment this week. We've seen our big vision, it's now about the detail.
Nick, it's been good to talk to you. We're going to carry on here on BBC One and on the BBC News channel. But I'm going to probably, just to be transparent with viewers, I'm going to nip out for 20 minutes so I can prepare for BBC News at 6, which is coming up at, guess what, 6 o'clock. But I want to say thanks to Nick for now. And to all of you for watching. Stay watching, because the coverage continues here on BBC One and on the channel. What I think I should do at this point then is, for those of you just joining us at this time of day, but just about 25 past 5, is to remind you of what happened in the last half an hour. The new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has arrived in Downing Street, just about managed to avoid the torrential rain. New Prime Minister came in, gave some opening remarks and tried to set out I suppose, some broad ideas about what she intends to achieve. But on the big issues of cost of living and energy, on the rest of it, we'll have to wait certainly for much more detail. Ros Atkins will join you in just a moment. But for me, thanks for watching. And let's just remind ourselves of what the new Prime Minister had to say.
Good afternoon. I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government. Let me pay tribute to my predecessor. Boris Johnson delivered Brexit, the COVID vaccine, and stood up to Russian aggression. History will see him as a hugely consequential Prime Minister. I'm honoured to take on this responsibility at a vital time for our country. What makes the United Kingdom great is our fundamental belief in freedom, in enterprise, and in fair play. Our people have shown grit, courage, and determination time and time again. We now face severe global headwinds caused by Russia's appalling war in Ukraine and the aftermath of COVID. Now is the time to tackle the issues that are holding Britain back. We need to build roads, homes and broadband faster. We need more investment and great jobs in every town and city across our country. We need to reduce the burden on families and help people get on in life. I know that we have what it takes to tackle those challenges. Of course, it won't be easy, but we can do it. We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation with high-paying jobs, safe streets, and where everyone, everywhere, has the opportunities they deserve. I will take action this day and action every day to make it happen. United with our allies, we will stand up for freedom and democracy around the world, recognising that we can't have security at home without having security abroad. As Prime Minister, I will pursue 3 early priorities. Firstly, I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. I will drive reform in my mission to get the United Kingdom working, building and growing. We'll get spades in the ground to make sure people are not facing unaffordable energy bills, and we will also make sure that we are building hospitals, schools, roads and broadband. Secondly, I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply. Thirdly, I will make sure that people can get doctor's appointments and the NHS services they need. We will put our health service on a firm footing. By delivering on the economy, on energy and on the NHS, we will put our nation on the path to long-term success. We shouldn't be daunted by the challenges we face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done. We have huge reserves of talent, of energy and determination. I am confident that together we can ride out the storm, we can rebuild our economy, and we can become the modern, brilliant Britain that I know we can be. This is our vital mission to ensure opportunity and prosperity for all people and future generations. I am determined to deliver. Thank you.
So there we have it, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister of...
I'm Ross Atkins here in Downing Street as we continue BBC News' coverage of Liz Truss becoming the new Prime Minister of the UK. In that speech, she outlined 3 priorities for her leadership: improving the strength of the UK economy, addressing the energy crisis, and supporting the National Health Service, in particular as the UK goes into what looks like it will be a challenging winter because of that energy crisis. Well, let's bring in Daisy Cooper, who's Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. And Daisy Cooper, I'm sure you were watching that speech. It's hard to argue with the priorities that the new Prime Minister has set out.
Well, quite frankly, I think that the new Prime Minister has completely missed the mark and has completely misread the mood of the public. We have a cost of living emergency coming down the line like a juggernaut, and she conveyed absolutely no sense of urgency and once again has failed to show a plan. Of course, no one can argue with the priorities of the economy, of energy and the NHS. But it's a bit rich hearing that from a Conservative when it's the Conservative government that has for years been trashing our economy, pushing our NHS and social care services into the ground and have failed to take the action to get us off fossil fuels and onto renewables.
But you know full well the different roles the process of becoming Prime Minister perform, and this statement in Downing Street was not the place to spend 20 minutes going through detailed policy. Liz Truss has said that detail will come in the next few days. Isn't it absolutely reasonable for her to set out a vision in this speech and give us details in the coming days this week?
This was supposed to be the Prime Minister's first speech to the country, her first speech to the public. Now, when I talk to the public, what I hear from my constituents and other people is that people are really scared. People don't know if their businesses are going to survive the next couple of days, let alone the next couple of weeks or months. They want to hear that the Prime Minister gets it. They want to hear that the Prime Minister has a plan. It's fallen to opposition parties like the Liberal Democrats to take the bold action and make a proposal that we should be freezing energy bills and getting the big oil and gas companies to pay for that. All we've heard are rumours so far from Liz Truss's government and from her camp that actually, yes, they might freeze energy bills. We haven't had that confirmed. But if they do, it's not really going to be a freeze. It's going to be a very long-term loan. loan that taxpayers are going to have to pay back for years to come. So what we wanted to hear was a Prime Minister that was in touch with the British public, and I think she showed herself today to be completely out of touch.
Well, are you not being, though, unreasonable about the situation that Liz Truss finds herself in? It would have been completely inappropriate for her to announce plans for the energy crisis before she even became Prime Minister. She's been Prime Minister for a matter of hours. She's walked through the door of Number 10 for the first time as Prime Minister just a few minutes ago. It's not unreasonable for her to take a day or two before sharing what, according to briefings, will be a substantial intervention in the energy crisis. I don't quite know why the Liberal Democrats are picking a fight on this.
Well, because we've had a Conservative government for years and years and years. We've had a Conservative Prime Minister in Number 10 for the whole of the summer who did absolutely nothing. We had a Tory leadership contest where both of the candidates could have used the opportunity of that contest to set out their plans, and they've comprehensively failed to do so. We fully expected, as opposition MPs, that the leadership candidates would have set out their stall not only to their party but also to the country, and yet here we are, Parliament has come back and we're still waiting for details of what the government is actually going to do. The fact is that the public is in a crisis. There are businesses in my constituency that may not last a next couple of days, let alone a couple of weeks. The public and the country cannot wait for the Conservative Party to sort this out. We need to see bold, strong action like the Liberal Democrats have been calling for weeks.
Well, we don't need to. We've discussed the timing of this. Liz Truss says she's going to give us details very soon. When she announces that intervention, because there seems no doubt there will be an intervention of sorts, how do you think she should pay for that? Should it be in the form of loans to some of the energy companies, or do you think it should simply be that the government takes on debt in order to fund what will be billions of pounds worth of intervention?
I don't think it has to be either of those options. What the Liberal Democrats have proposed is that we freeze energy prices and pay for it through a much tougher windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies. And also don't forget that because of rising inflation, the government is bringing in a lot more money through VAT returns, and some of that money could be used to pay for freezing the cap. It's really important that if we're going to freeze energy prices, that we get a genuine freeze. And I'm afraid that all we're hearing so far are rumours that we're not really going to be a freeze. It's going to be a very long-term debt that taxpayers or consumers will have to pay back for years and years to come. So we do need Number 10 to come clean very, very quickly.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us on BBC News. We appreciate your time. So that's the response of the Liberal Democrats to Liz Truss's speech. Now let's turn to Honiton in Devon in the southwest of England, the scene of that by-election a couple of months ago where the Liberal Democrats overturned a big majority to take the seat from the Conservatives. It was a big moment for them. Jenny Kumar is there for us. Jenny, what's the reaction been to Liz Truss taking over as Prime Minister?
Yeah, so before the by-election, this was a staunchly Conservative area. They always voted in a Conservative MP, but that all changed around 2.5 months ago when the Lib Dems won here. They took Tiverton and Honiton, overturned a majority of 24,000. That by-election sparked by the resignation of the Conservative MP Neil Parish. He resigned after admitting watching pornography on his phone in the House of Commons. Now, today I've been speaking to people about our new Prime Minister and asking them how they feel about Liz Truss.
Yeah, I think that she'd be great as long as she can keep up a promise and do something about the energy bills and help the general public out.
Yeah, and how worried are you about?
Quite worried. I'm about to buy a house. It's just me and Maisie, and it will be just us dealing with a 3-bedroom house and the bills that go with it. So we'll probably be in energy poverty before we even start.
I'm not entirely happy about it. I preferred Sunak, but to be absolutely honest, I think the Conservative Party's in such a terrible state. There's not an awful lot that anyone can do about it, least of all those two. They need to sort themselves out.
I'm just hoping she does a good job, you know. I mean, you can't say anything about her because if you don't know, but hopefully she'll do better than Boris Johnson.
I think they're all as bad as each other. How did you feel when you heard that she'd won the leadership election?
Just a bit like, kind of. I don't really trust any of them, to be honest. I think.
And how hopeful are you that she'll make a difference?
Not very, sadly.
We got to be hopeful, haven't we, going forward for the next few years, until the next general election. We just got to put all our trust in Truss. Basically, that's what we've got to do.
Do you think she can win the next election?
if she pulls this around, then it's going to be tough. Possibly, yeah. I don't know. It's up in the air at the moment. So shall we see what we get on in the next winter.
So those just some of the views of residents and business owners here in Honiton, and the win here was a real boost for the Liberal Democrats. They are now looking at getting back some of their former strongholds here in the southwest. But the victory here happened in the dying days of Boris Johnson's premiership. 2 weeks after the loss of this seat here, Boris Johnson resigned. So it remains to be seen just what a difference a Liz Truss government could make if there is a general election in the next 2 years.
Jenny, thank you very much indeed. There's Jenny live with us from Honiton in Devon, which across the summer was host to a pivotal political moment. Next, let's bring in Kirsten Oswald, Deputy Westminster Leader of the SNP. Thank you very much indeed to you for joining us. What are your thoughts on what we heard from the new Prime Minister?
Well, I have to say I was pretty underwhelmed by what I heard. I think that people across Scotland and across the rest of the UK who were watching will have been pretty underwhelmed too. I didn't hear anything that gave me any comfort that Liz Truss fully appreciates the real significant difficulty that people are in, that households are in, and that businesses are in. So I think that we need much, much more, and we need it very soon.
Well, Liz Truss has said that she will be giving us much, much more, both in terms of detail and in terms of a significant intervention, particularly with reference to the energy crisis, not just on families, but on small businesses. Presumably you think we should now wait on that detail before drawing conclusions about its merits.
I think that we've waited for quite a long time already, to be fair. I can't understand why all summer we've allowed the Conservative Party to talk to themselves. They've done that, and they've excluded all of the people who are so concerned in my constituency and elsewhere from the discussions that should have been taking place about how on earth we do make sure that those who are least able to afford it are properly protected here. So here we wait again.
I'm confused here because the SNP was one of the parties calling for Boris Johnson to go, calling for Conservative MPs to intervene. They did then intervene, just as you wanted them to. Boris Johnson said he would stand down. You knew that would mean a Conservative Party leadership process, which the parties then carried out. You can't have it both ways. You can't call for the Prime Minister to go and then complain when a party takes some time to choose who should succeed it.
I think what we can expect is for the government to actually govern, to behave like a government. And I think that there is nobody who really imagines that that's what's happened over the summer. They've been absolutely missing in action. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was off on holiday. His potential successors, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, were too busy knocking political lumps out of each other. And here we have a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who's had ample opportunity to set out her stall. And I've heard nothing today that's given me any comfort that she really understands what that should mean. I don't know any more about what particular measures she plans to put in place, and I'm deeply concerned about what she said about taxes too. There are people who can ill afford to wait any longer for proper measures, and I certainly hope that we do see the very ambitious and far-reaching measures which must not fall on the shoulders of those who can least afford it.
Well, as you correctly point out, Liz Truss talked about cutting taxes a lot during her contest with Rishi Sunak, and she said in this speech again that she intends to cut taxes now that she's in charge. Let me also ask you about another speech we heard in Downing Street a little bit earlier, about 7:30 this morning, in fact, when Boris Johnson made his final speech as the outgoing Prime Minister, and he said that the UK was more united than ever, that he was committed, the Conservatives were committed to making sure that the UK remained as one. Clearly you represent a party which would like Scottish independence. I wonder what your thoughts were on his analysis of the State of the Union.
I'm not sure that Boris Johnson's analysis is something that people have been particularly focused on. I think that his speech, in fact, was quite extraordinary in many ways. He went from space rockets to space hoppers and cats and dogs too. So Boris Johnson's entitled to his view on the future of the Union, but of course it's not actually up to Boris Johnson or up to Liz Truss or anyone else at Westminster what happens in terms of a referendum. So we will have a referendum in Scotland. That's what the government in Scotland has a mandate to deliver, and people quite correctly expect us to deliver on that. That's what's going to happen, and I look forward to people having the opportunity to have that conversation.
Kirsten Oswald, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Kirsten Oswald is the Deputy Westminster Leader of the SNP. Well, let's continue to get reaction to Liz Truss becoming the UK's new Prime Minister. Fiona Trott is in Doncaster. Hi, Fiona. Good to see you. I wonder what conversations you've been having about Liz Truss.
Well, it was her moment earlier, wasn't it, to address the nation, address parts of northern England here and say to people, look, I understand the pain that you're in, this is what I'm going to do about it. But how is it received here? Not by Conservative Party members who she's been addressing over the past few weeks during the leadership campaign and who voted for her anyway, but to those new converts, people in the former Red Wall seats who are reassured by what Boris Johnson had to say, and Labour marginals like this one in Doncaster Central. Does she have her work cut out to win them over?
I vote Labour normally, but from the current state, I would put my name behind Liz Truss to take the country out of this mess and crisis.
I think for the working families, it's important that she pays attention to the fact that people go to work and do as much as they can and they still struggle.
Anything other than what the Labour Party would do. That would just decimate the whole country if Labour got in, like we did before. Through the times when it was wage increases every week, every month. Crazy times. And Labour just can't live up to the economic policies that they always extol.
Let's speak now to Leah Twigg. You're just 23, Leah. You live and work in Doncaster. You started your own business back in April. You have a brand new bakery. You heard that speech earlier, Liz Truss saying things like aspiration, nation, we've got grit, courage and determination. I know the British people are strong. I'm confident we can ride this storm and rebuild the economy. What do you make of that?
All the points she's made are great, but if it's going to happen, we need to see action now instead of just words. It's okay saying we're strong, we can do this, but we need a leader to make those things happen. That would be the next step, actually seeing these things happen.
And for you as a business lady, we think about costs, and of course cost of living and energy is something that we're going to hear more about later this week, we understand. For you then, let's understand the costs. Butter, flour, you've got ovens to run, fridges.
Yeah.
What would you like to see later this week in detail?
Some form of explanation on how we are going to move forward with the crazy energy prices, because it's affecting everybody, not just businesses, but us more so because we're using it daily. We're spending more than £1,000 a week on ingredients, which has massively gone up. The reliability of ingredients is not there. Just basically a plan of how she's going to do it and what we are going to do to be able to take the steps to get the energy down, which is what we need.
And if she and her new cabinet could tell you how they were going to help with energy bills, for example, would that be enough for you? Would you feel confident as a businesswoman and someone who has to pay their own bills at home too?
Yeah, no, it's simply just not enough. It is just scratching the surface of a much bigger problem with just the money of everything going up. The cost of living's going up, but the wages aren't meeting it. And I know she said about wages, but again, we yet to see it happen. We really do need action sooner rather than later, or else I hate to think what is going to happen.
What might happen? Are you worried about the business?
We may not have a business anymore, and I know a lot of other people are in the exact same situation, worrying, like you say, not just with the business, but at home. Like, we have also got home bills to pay. It's so uncertain, and with COVID just passing, it's more uncertainty on top of COVID, like we've just had to all get through.
It's interesting, it's worrying as well, because you are the sort of poster girl, I suppose, for the Conservatives. Here you are, you're 23 years old, starting up your own business, with your own money.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in the speech that interested you?
Definitely the doctors. Addressing that problem would be very big. I know so many people close to me, even my dad, who have had problems reaching out for the help and the reassurance of doctors who are meant to help us and help us get help. and it's just not happening. There's hours waits on phones. It just needs to be better. Like the NHS is such a huge part of keeping us all together, like through COVID. We need to help them, and we need to help make the situations better for everybody else to feel confidence again.
Yeah. Leah, thank you very much for chatting to us here this evening. That's something that a lot of people have been telling us over the past couple of days when we've been here in the north of England. It is feeling that confidence and also faith in politicians, and also the detail which we're expecting later this week, particularly with the cost of living crisis. Downing Street is miles away from Doncaster, and addressing the cost of living crisis for people here in the north of England this week has never been so important.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed. And as I'm listening to Fiona, I'm thinking back to the statement of one Boris Johnson loyalist last night who said the Conservative Party was in danger of not listening to what those who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 want. And that was very much a reference to people who hadn't voted Tory before, who in 2019 did it for the first time. And of course, some of those people are in constituencies such as the one that Fiona has just spoken to us from. Well, let's continue to get reaction to Liz Truss's speech as she became Prime Minister. She visited the Queen a little earlier, was invited to form a government. She then travelled from Scotland down to Downing Street, managed to dodge the showers just about, gave her speech and then went through the famous black door and is now beginning her work, of course. The political campaign strategist Jo Tanner is with us. Jo, thank you very much indeed. You've been an advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London. You've advised other politicians too. I wonder what you made of Liz Truss's strategy in that speech.
Well, there's probably twofold. Number one was, let's just get on with this and get in before the rain might start again. There was a practical consideration going on. Obviously, we saw all the furniture being moved and everyone trying to dodge the showers. But then secondly, you know, we've heard a lot from her and what she wants to do over the last few weeks. And I think it was a case of, I'm just going to tell people there's a job to do. And everyone's been complaining that this election contest has sort of stopped everything happening, the machinery of government not turning properly. So she was, you know, quite, I think, get on with the job. Let's get in and get on with it. And I think that's probably the right message right now. There are people out there hurting who've got big problems that need to be solved.
And just in the last half an hour, I've spoken to the Liberal Democrats, to the SNP as well. They're very quick to remind me and everyone watching that the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years, that when Liz Truss says she's going to address all of these things, they counter, well, you've had 12 years to address these already. As a strategist, how does a politician who takes over after their party's been in power for some time address those critiques?
I think it's a really tough job, and I think people have to recognise that Liz Truss is a brave woman to take this on right now. It is a tough gig. There's a lot to deal with. The country has seen huge delays in terms of policy development and just stuff being fixed, big problems that we've got that need to be dealt with. Brexit took up a lot of time in government, and COVID obviously delayed things immensely, and you know, it has cost the country greatly. So I think the issues now that she's got on her plate are still those issues that were being talked about at the 2019 election, possibly even slightly before that. I think there are big structural issues around social care that need to be dealt with. She mentioned GPs, which we all know, the fact you can't get a GP appointment then ends up with pressure being put on NHS A&E departments, for example. So we know that, you know, she's already sort of talking about some of the things that affect people's daily lives. And I don't really know if there is an answer to that question as to how do you sort of draw a line. You've just got to get on, and I think pretty quickly you've got to be saying stuff that shows you've got a grip of the problem and that you're looking to find the solutions. And I'd hope that they're actually coming into government. This new group of people are coming in with solutions that they've already been putting their minds to, because the country can't wait much longer for things to be solved.
And Jo, just in your most recent answer there, you list a range of huge policy challenges for Liz Truss. When you've advised politicians on how to communicate with people and they've got a range of priorities, what advice do you offer them? Because perhaps if you try and communicate across all of these policy challenges, you risk not getting your one or two key messages across.
I think that is a huge challenge. When there is a lot to talk about, there's only so much that people will pay attention to. So she needs to have a very good team in cabinet. She needs to have people that can also be very effective communicators. And you know, you're going to have to level with the public about what's coming, and you're going to have to be honest about the choices that are being made and why. And I think actually that's what people will appreciate. I don't think they'll necessarily like all of what they're going to hear, but they'll want to know that someone's got their hand on the tiller, that they've got a really good set of answers to the challenges, and that they're going to get on with it. And so I think levelling with the public is important. I think this isn't a time for broad ideological speeches. This is about solutions. We need a solution-driven government, and I think that's what Liz and her team now need to be looking to assemble, and I hope that's the work that's going on behind the scenes, because talking to the public and helping them understand is going to make some of what the pain that's coming perhaps slightly easier to bear when people think that there is going to be a solution coming down the line, hopefully in time for people given what they're facing.
Jo Tanner, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on BBC News, and certainly that need for detail, practical detail that Jo Tanner was outlining, well, pressure for that is coming from a number of different directions on Liz Truss, not least from opposition parties who are saying, look, it's all very well you giving this first speech and outlining your priorities, but hold on, you've got to tell us what you're doing about the cost of living crisis, and in particular what you're doing about energy prices. Liz Truss acknowledged that the cost of living crisis was happening, but she declined in this speech to go into detail as to how her government may intervene. However, it's been widely briefed that an intervention will be announced very soon. We don't have a fixed time on that, but the expectation is it will be towards the end of this week, or if not then, we can assume early next week. So that detail's coming, but it hasn't yet been put into the public domain by Liz Truss. She no doubt is, as she's now become Prime Minister, working through the detail of those policies which she's going to share with us. And it's worth just also reminding you what she had to deal with a little bit earlier. Jo Tanner was alluding to this. The journalists were all gathered here in Downing Street. There was a crowd out the front of the gates as well, but then the heavens opened. Some of her colleagues who were just standing there getting ready to cheer her from in front of the door of number 11 had to go back inside because the downpour was so intense. But it passed and paused for a moment, and Liz Truss came into Downing Street in her car and gave the speech which you may well have seen. Well, let's continue to discuss the sorts of measures that Liz Truss may be able to introduce to help people cope with the energy and the cost of living crises. Joining us now on BBC News is Martin McTague, National Chair of the Federation of Small Businesses. Mr. McTague, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. What are your hopes for what Liz Truss will announce either later this week or next week?
I think there are early indications that she takes this crisis really seriously. I mean, it's an absolutely toxic mix of businesses running out of cash, their customers deserting them, and also there is high taxation, it's the highest since the last 50 years. We are looking for her to do what she's promised in her acceptance speech, which is focus on delivery. And there are early indications that she is very keen to attack the problem of fantastically high energy prices for small businesses. I mean, we heard an example the other day of a hairdresser paying 6 times the price they had paid previously. And then, you know, they've literally only got weeks to go before the contracts need to be renewed.
So you're looking for immediate intervention in terms of businesses' bills, but I'm imagining, but tell me if I'm wrong here, that perhaps business is harder because people across the country are tightening their belts, perhaps not spending as they might do because they're concerned about what's coming this winter.
Yeah, I mean, confidence is very low, both in business and in the community generally. But don't forget, 16 million people work for small businesses across the UK. The last thing you want to do is add another element or another layer of insecurity by people worrying about their jobs. I think it's really important that on Thursday, when she announces the energy package, that she includes small businesses and they can have some confidence in their future.
Martin McTague, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Liz Truss said one of her 3 priorities was to strengthen the UK economy, and of course small businesses are a crucial part of the UK economy. We'll see how much she is willing to explicitly talk about help being offered to small businesses because of potential drop in consumer demand, but more immediately the rising bills that they're facing, as Mr. McTague was outlining. Just a reminder, you can get further coverage of Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister through the BBC News live page at bbc.com/news. But let's look back over an important few miles.
This is it, folks. I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you.
I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government. I am determined to deliver. Thank you.